what a warm welcome to people in the room and to the people who are dialing in and watching in online. So what a journey it's been. We're at the end of a 3-year program of Next Generation Services. And absolutely what a journey it's been. It's been my pleasure to be working with Stephen, who will introduce in just a moment. Since 2017, we've been working together on developing and delivering the Next Generation Services program. So today is the end, the closeout of this program and our showcase event. And we really, our aims and ambitions is to share the learnings and the insights, and also to continue to create the networking and to hopefully carry on the impacts and the good partnerships that we've seen that have been forming throughout the time over the last 3 years on the program. We are, of course, in room and live online, so we're in a hybrid event. And apologies, especially online, where we might have a few technical glitches, as per normal, as we all start to work out how these sorts of events work throughout time again, and normalize it back into our daily ways of working. I'm Melanie Netsch, and I have been Deputy on the Challenge as part of UK Research and Innovation of this, and I'm also Deputy Director of Innovation and Impact at the Economic and Social Research Council. Before handing to Stephen, I actually have to say it's with great pleasure that I have to give some housekeeping rules today. How long has it been since we've done some housekeeping? Yay for housekeeping. So, no fire drills are planned for today, and those of you online will probably be pleased to hear that. If we do have a fire drill, our exits are on either side of the room, and we will have some event staff that will come and escort us and help us out. Again, a long time since we've been together in an in-person event, so if you could possibly turn your phones on silent, that would be very much appreciated. We will have a roving microphone for the people in the room as we get through the sessions and if you have any questions. And I do think there's a chat function for those of you online, so you can post those in the chat and we'll try to pick up those questions with the various panels and the discussions that we have. And finally, we're trying to be relaxed and in the event. We don't have any formal toilet breaks planned throughout. We will be coming through the session with our talks, end on a panel for lunch, and then we will be coming back about 2 o'clock. So for those of you in the room, just feel free to pop out, and the toilets are right next to the cloakroom, to my right, your left of the room. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephen Browning, who's been the director of this challenge. And he'll give us an overview of what we were trying to achieve over the last few years of the program. Welcome, Stephen.
So, God, that light's bright. I'm sorry, guys in this side of the room, I'm going to be facing this way because I can't see that way. So firstly, I'd also like to add my welcome to you. It is really good to be in person again. I don't know how many of you have managed to be in person over the last few months, but this is one of the first things for me. So it's great to see you all. If I come up to you and offer to shake your hand and you don't want to, please don't feel obliged to shake. Just do what you feel is right for you. So as Mel said, I want to just remind you of what we were trying to do. Some of you will probably have seen some of these slides a number of times before, so apologies for that, but there are some in the room that I think this is fresh to, so just want to bring everyone up to speed. Oh, we've got program. So first of all, in case you don't know who UKRI are, we see ourselves as the custodians of the science and innovation ecosystem in the UK. We're the primary funder for science and innovation across the economy, made up of 9 councils, of which the Economic and Social Research Council, from which Mel comes, is one, and Innovate UK, which is where I come from, is another. So this particular program has been delivered by both ESRC and Innovate UK, with the recognition that actually technology is often not the thing that holds back innovation. It's pretty much always people. Sometimes I like to say I'd like to get rid of the people because that would make it so much easier, but today I feel that's different, being in person. So that's why it's delivered between the two of us. And Innovate UK, for those of you that don't know, are the business-facing part of UKRI. So we fund and support R&D within, or business-led R&D, while ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council, funds academic research in economic and social research, as it says. The program itself that this is all under is called Next Generation Services. Our sort of mission statement, challenge statement to ourselves was that we're trying to support the development and use of AI and data technologies more broadly within the professional and financial services sectors, particularly thinking about the responsible use of AI and data. And that's also an emphasis from bringing in ESRC as well as Innovate UK. And it's meant to be for the benefit of the UK. So the program objectives that we had, first of all, we wanted to support the leadership position of the UK, particularly in accountancy, insurance and legal services. Those are the areas that we focused on. Recognizing that those areas are not seen as highly R&D intensive areas, then we also had an aim of supporting the increasing capability and capacity of the sectors to engage in R&D. As well as those three sectors, we were also looking to support the sort of tech supply side area to these, so law tech, account tech, and insure tech. And then finally, recognizing that UKRI has not engaged significantly with accountancy, insurance, legal services in the past, then our goal was to show that UKRI could provide value to those sectors, show how to work with them, and prove that there was an appetite from those sectors to engage. And in a while, Mel will tell us whether we've succeeded in doing that sort of thing, but those were our goals. So just a little overview of what the makeup of the program was, because a number of you will have been active in parts of this, and maybe it's not clear to you exactly what the whole came from. So in the middle there, you will see 5 boxes, which were the primary work streams of the program. The 3 right in the middle were the most significant parts. So we had a collaborative research and development activity, business-led innovation, funding projects to deliver either point solutions within a workflow for accountancy, insurance, and legal services, or potentially entire service offerings. We also then had a research program, academic research program, looking at the barriers and opportunities that were within these sectors for innovation, and what we called an enabling data access program. So there we brought a number of people, 60-odd people together in a room for 3 days, quite intensive activity, trying to come up with ideas on how to improve access to data across these 3 sectors. And then from that, we took proposals for projects that then we funded to try and deliver that access to data. And in total, we had something like 40 projects across those 3 middle areas. Then supporting the whole program, we set up the AI for Services network delivered by Innovate UK KTN, who also organised this event. And they were our sort of interaction with industry, academia, our ears to what needed to be done, and our way of disseminating what has been learnt on the program. And then finally, we had a very small international piece, which, as you'll appreciate, got a bit hit over the past 2 years. We did actually manage to just do one final mission last week to Canada, but that was rather smaller. So trying to understand what the opportunities are to work with other countries as well. So that was the makeup of the program. And I think that's pretty much all I want to say at this stage on how it was. So thank you for that. We're going to move now to our first keynote, which is an online keynote from Gavin Stark. Gavin, for those of you who don't know him, formerly co-chaired the body that put together the open banking proposals. He was also CEO of the Open Data Institute, and now he's CEO of a company called Icebreaker One. Icebreaker One was one of the organizations that led the consortia that came out of that data access activity that I spoke about. And his project, or their project, was looking at insurance within, or the climate change effect on insurance, right? And trying to bring data together around that. So hopefully we can now move to Gavin and let him tell us about that. Thank you. It's all yours, Gavin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gavin Starks, as you've just been introduced. The work we want to talk about, I want to just walk you through today, is through Icebreaker One, really looking at this huge crisis that we're facing around climate change and the drive to net zero, which is now a legally binding target, and what role can data play in that. Icebreaker One's an independent non-profit trying to catalyze this development. And what we're looking at is how do we build a web of net zero data? And as will become evident over the next few minutes, how complex and interwoven all of that is, but actually how we might be able to address some of these challenges. The big challenge, of course, is how to direct our finance towards solving it, to driving towards net zero. And that means we have to somehow combine data flows across the financial sector through industry to impact our environment and bring those things together to improve our risk modeling and so on. But I want to start off with just a little bit of context here, a couple of positioning pieces. So Donella Meadows' thinking systems piece there, missing information flows is one of the most common causes of systems malfunction. Adding or restoring information can be a powerful intervention, usually much easier and cheaper than rebuilding our physical infrastructure. And that's kind of the scale of the challenge we have right now, is something equivalent of combining the Marshall Plan and the Apollo mission is what we're really trying to do here in rebuilding parts of our global infrastructure. And when we look at that through the lens of Icebreaker One, we think about how addressing our data infrastructure can enable us to use the wealth of data which is at our disposal to unlock the abundance of capital that's waiting to be deployed around our climate emergency. So what does this translate into? Well, just again, a little bit of context. What's different to even 10 years ago is the internet and the web has gone through a massive transformation. And it's one of these things, it's hard to see when you're kind of in the moment. But if you think about what we've built over the last 20, 30 years, there's over 1 billion websites. And now we're instrumenting everything. There's sensors on pretty much all of our infrastructure. There's Earth observation data, whole Earth observation every day, quite high resolution and multispectral. And so you've got this huge amount of data that is available, but it's not accessible. So when we think about this in terms of a market, one of the questions we've got here is how can we connect policy, industry, and investment at the data level? To frame this, our experience with the insurance sector, a lot of work is done either with spreadsheets. There's a huge amount of work still in every sector and every organization done on spreadsheets, or proprietary software as a service or analytical packages where the data flow is pretty much locked up. So when we look at this as terms of the complexity of the system and where we need to see this data flow being unlocked, particularly for the investment community to do their planning and risk modeling and so on, there's millions of systems that are producing data, and there'll be billions of systems. And that makes us data suppliers, right down to the asset level. There'll be lots of aggregators, thousands of companies. I mean, just in the energy sector, there's over 8,000 companies in the energy sector. And in terms of the users, it's people looking at forward planning, looking at efficiency, looking at risk modeling. But there's mandatory compliance now with reporting frameworks like TCFD, where people have to, organizations have to report on their climate risk and their plans as to what they're going to do about it. The complexity underneath that, however, is that that data needs to come from many different sources. So while there are reporting frameworks that are trying to standardize around the description of those risks, there's very little work on the other end of that. And what are the inputs? But those inputs come from asset level data, increasingly will come from digital twin work. There's geospatial information about land usage. There's the environmental data, where do the assets exist, physical infrastructure, what are the links to risks and hazards in the mix there, and then what's the policy and regulatory framework around that, which is going to drive a lot of behavior change. So in the context of this program, the question that we were asking is, what is the power of net zero data to help unlock finance? And whether that's looking at improving efficiency or adaptive risk management or exposure to perils, physical risks, transition risks, cat risks, etc., there's a huge amount of work to be done. And one of the core questions here is, what does it mean to be climate ready? What is a climate ready investment, or what is a climate ready financial instrument? How can we get to climate aware risk management that is not just looking backwards, but very much looking forwards? And here, it's not enough to just drive towards net zero. We've got to prove that we're going to hit net zero. Missing the targets is not really much of an option when you look at the underlying physics. So what we did within this program, which we called SERI, which is a standard for environment, risk, and insurance, was pose that question: what is a climate-ready financial product? And we were very fortunate to partner with a range of different organizations, including Aon, Lloyd's Register, Arup, Brit Insurance, Willis Towers, Watson, University of Cambridge, and many other small companies as well. And what we did over the period of this project, it was really explore what are those product candidates. We identified many along the way, over 20 different products. We held over 50 events, even though it was in a lockdown situation. Actually, that in some ways, lockdown helped us in that we were able to convene people from across organizations and across the country more efficiently. But it was also a massive challenge trying to do innovation on a Zoom call. It's not the ideal platform to try and innovate. We set up various advisory groups to help steer the work, and really iterated heavily on that product innovation side. I'll come back to some of those outcomes in a moment, but I just wanted to start off, as we were hearing, this is not a technology problem per se. Yes, technology is a component of it, but actually the process here that was central to our thinking was to bring together product innovation, looking at the market potential, so doing market sizing and the business modeling around that, looking at the underlying user needs of the market and the market actors, but then also looking at policy innovation. What's the legal and regulatory landscape? What kinds of policy interventions can be made? And how do we do licensing of data across those systems? This is not just about open data. I ran the Open Data Institute for 4 years, and I can say everyone loves open data as long as it's not them having to make it open. So the key here is, how can you provide mechanisms to share data in a secure way with liability transfer and all the contractual pieces that don't involve hundreds of bilateral conversations and don't take 9 months per contract. So underneath all of that, we're looking at the systems innovation, what standards, what principles can be developed to help unlock that data flow. On the product innovation side, we looked at dozens of different product ideas. At one point, we were doing weekly product sprints to look across decarbonisation of shipping, through to EV insurance, through to mortgage impairment and flood risk, right the way through to D&O insurance, director and officer inaction insurance. What we found through that process, so we're working with some startups, one of them here, Agvesto, was looking at market instruments for water quality trading. So how can you actually develop parametric insurance solutions for water quality in different territories? And they've developed a product which they're taking out to market in India right now. So there were some tangible outcomes here of when we unlock this data flow, what does that really enable? So the one that we ended up anchoring into, I know I'm just going to put up a slide here of, sorry, I missed a slide there, was just realized the slides are out of sync. Looking at climate-ready building passports, which was one area of activity where all of the different actors across the insurance sector and with Arup were looking at everything from building asset owners through to the investment community, through to commercial users. And what we found there is there's a huge amount of information right across the spectrum from building information management systems right the way through to energy usage and water usage across the system. So what we produced out of this was this whole series of different case studies and use cases anchored in the principles and practices of how can you build a trusted data ecosystem, to what specific use cases can be developed, what are the technical considerations, and what are the regulatory considerations. All of those reports are on our website, so you can download them and read them. But I want to now just take a bit of a step back into the framework here that we developed, which took open banking as its blueprint and said, look, what's required here as part of a market architecture for a trust framework to share information across all these different organizational boundaries and across the market. And we anchored there on around 5 core principles. Those principles being that we had to have common rules and common processes, common frameworks for data rights and data licensing, as well as creating a consent management process to enable the data to flow with the permission of the different actors in the system. So what that led us to was the creation of a trust framework here, where we're building a public-private interaction here between the different actors. And this has also been picked up now with the open energy work that we've been doing, taking this work directly into the energy sector. So what we found here is that the principles and practice of open banking can be applied across the insurance sector, but when you drill into the actual data requirements, you're immediately jumping into different sectoral access to different sectoral information, whether that's environmental data or asset level information and energy information and so on. So what we've tried to do is bring all of these things together. And in parallel, there's been a huge amount of work being done nationally on the drive towards net zero. So you've got net zero strategy development through the 10-point plan for the green industrial revolution. You've got the industrial strategy. You've got the national digital twin strategy. All of these things come together with the financial sector through regulated development or regulatory development through the FCA and the PRA and the Climate Financial Risk Forum. You've got the drivers through the reporting frameworks like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD piece. And so there's a real opportunity here to start using these policy instruments to force open access to data, not openly licensing it, but opening up the access to it in a risk-controlled manner that can start to unlock product innovation on the ground. And so SERI program and the funding that we've received through this program has enabled us to develop a longer term strategy. SERI is part of that. We now have the energy component of that up and running. We're now looking towards transport, water, built world, and agriculture to help take these things forward at scale. And I think there's a real opportunity again within the insurance sector to use some of these data assets that are coming to market. One of the things that we learned through our work with Cambridge University is that the quality of the data that they're putting into these models, whether they're analytics models or AI, if the data quality is not high, then the old adage of garbage in, garbage out does apply. So we need to get better access to the kind of original source data, if you like, from the assets themselves and from the various monitoring systems that exist out there. So we're really excited by this project. Like I said, we had dozens of different commercial partners in the mix. We've had a lot of international interest around this. Many hundreds of people, I think it was over 500 people, accessing our online events, and over 500,000 in our reach to the broader ecosystem through various publications and reports and articles. But I'll pass back now to our hosts, and if there are any questions, we can take that forward.
Great, thank you very much, Gavin. We have about 5 minutes for any questions from the room, and also I think, Tim, you're monitoring the online chat, are you, or Wynne, just to see if there's any questions we have online. Do we have our microphone? Wynne has. Are there any questions? Wynne, we're going to make you earn your lunch today and do a few steps across the room.
I'll get my steps today, don't worry.
Thanks, Alistair. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, it's Alistair Milner, Loughborough University. I was co-PI of one of the projects there. I think my question is about where this is going forward. So as you may be aware, Loughborough's developed quite strong insurance relationships, particularly with Willis, or WTW, as they like to call themselves. So there's obviously a great opportunity to keep the flame alive, and I'm sure we would want to participate in that. So how does this work over the next couple of years, even when NGS is not in support?
Certainly. So what we've done, we've set up Icebreaker as an independent nonprofit very explicitly to help act as a neutral convener in this arena. And what we've kind of copied the model of the Open Data Institute and the Open Banking implementation entity to say, look, how can we really bring together the public sector and the private sector here? There's a very strong public good argument at the heart of this about enabling whole markets to develop around better access to data. But really it has to be driven a lot by the commercial sector and what's in it for them. So we have created through this program a membership process where we're funded ourselves through just strategic members and partners joining in to help shape the future of these services. And the process that we've developed combines advisory groups and steering groups to help bring people together and say, let's work out exactly what is market relevant in the near term, rather than necessarily kind of creating the kind of future vision that we may get to. It's how can we really crystallize this into today's problems? So the reason we took this use case based approach, which we had, as I say, dozens of different climate finance products explored, was to try and crystallize and break through where are the actual blockers. As we were hearing at the beginning, it's not necessarily a technology problem, but what we have found is the narrower we can get those use cases, the easier it is for everyone to cluster around them and say, okay, what do we actually need to do next? Is it a policy challenge? Is it a data licensing challenge? And how do we move that forward?
Thank you. Is there any online? No. Anybody else in the room? Any final questions? Oh, one more.
the table to ask difficult questions. So that question is a bit more controversial. Summer Trubin, Tech and GI Project Insurance. Open banking, it's been a while for more than 10 years, PSD2. How long? It's been a while for... my question is, you were emphasizing the value of data. So my question is, what about data value for consumers? So sharing the value and sharing the ownership in terms of your architecture. And maybe there is a place to go using more up-to-date technology, smart contract, etc., rather than to rely on something similar that was developed a while ago in banking. So maybe like more innovative approach using the current technologies that are available today in the market with smart contract, distributed ledgers for this implementation. And the second part of this point is the data value. How do you see that in terms of customers' data value? Do they share the value and ownership in your architecture?
Super. So a lot of different questions in there. Open banking has existed for not 10 years, but half that. We created the original specification for 2016, and it's taken a few years to get it into the market, but it's now being used by hundreds of organizations across the across the banking sector, and the fintech communities, and the banks. In terms of what's the right architectural solution here, it really, the technology is not the question here, and DLT may or may not be a useful thing to look at in the future, but I think it's a bit of a red herring today, frankly. The thing that we've really cracked with open banking is establishing what the data rights are for citizens and for consumers, and so that they have control, and most importantly, they have the same rules across the whole of the market. So it's both cohesive, there are common rules, and interoperable in such that there are common processes. So the challenge is not the technology, it's the legal frameworks, it's the data rights, it's the liability transfer, it's the signing up to the common contracts that is at the heart of this. And with open banking, all of the fintech companies sign up to the same legal terms, and that unlocks data sharing. The mechanics of how the data gets shared is less important. So there's rights-based consent management that is cohesive across the market and simple to consumers for them to understand. It's literally a background process, more like a kind of powered by rather than a consumer-facing standard. So that has helped to open up the whole market around banking. And what we've built now with energy, Open Energy uses the same principle of practice for B2B data as well as B2C data.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that excellent keynote and for setting us off on the path of what our conference and our showcase event is about today, Gavin. So just to say thank you very much for your presentation. And I get to follow that talk with a bit of highlighting about what's actually what the Next Generation Service Program has achieved, or what we're seeing it's going to be achieving, or the indicators or the pathways in its journeys to the impact and the difference it's making. I think while I'm talking towards the end, the next panel that will be coming up is going to be mic'd up. So just to, in case you see a few people walking over, they're just going to be putting their microphones on. So as Stephen was talking about the program, we've been working together very much across the economic and social science space with Innovate UK. And I really like, Alistair, your question about the flames to keep alive. And I suppose what I'm going to be presenting today is some of the areas of the flames that we've seen that have started to burn and might be, we're hoping, will be staying alive, and how we track and evidence that. As a social scientist, we always like our frameworks and our theories to work against, so I'm going to give you a few of those to help you hopefully see the journey that we've been on today. So as Stephen flagged, just the aim of the program is about developing the next generation of knowledge services. And I think the key for us is about the responsible use of AI, because it is public funding and we are a public organization. It's about how can we make it to the benefit of the UK within that. And it's about increasing data and digitization. And I think as we developed on the program, the data strand became far more apparent as the program matured throughout that. So what were our goals from the beginning? We had a lot of discussions, a lot of meetings, a lot of whiteboard drawing. And do you remember those days when you could have sticky notes and you could actually put them on and they would fall off the wall? All of those days, which I didn't realize how much I would miss. We started out the program. We were part of a broader area of funding called the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund at the time, which is has got a number of different programs and a number of different waves in it. And the whole point of the Industrial Strategy Challenge program was around focusing on raising productivity and earning power in the UK. Some of you might have heard around some of the other programs such as Future Flight, or we've got the Made Smarter around manufacturing, healthy aging. There's a lot of strands within this. As part of that program, the Next Generation Services, we were what was called a pioneer fund, as Stephen flagged. Mainly because as UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, we hadn't really had a lot of engagement with these sectors within the professional business services. So as I've already talked about it's about the focus on AI data ethics, but also about the UK's leadership position in this. The longer that Stephen and I had scoped out the program, the more we saw the opportunities across, particularly as a pioneer accountancy, legal and insurance, and what the role that the UK has in the global sphere of supporting other countries or driving innovations in this space. Stephen already talked about the aims of the program, focusing on the continued leadership of the UK, but also increase engagement in R&D by the sectors and, of course, the technology providers, sectors within this space. And also helping to grow. What we saw was sectors, but one of our goals was not just within each of them, was actually bringing together the sectors so that they could see they often had shared challenges. And how do you bring that thinking together in that space? And as a pioneer, to really learn, is there an opportunity for UKRI and government funding to support these sectors in this space? And our hypothesis was, of course, yes, but we needed to evidence within this. And of course, we've already got the 5 strands. And for those of you who do like a good old logic model, I'm going to be skipping a little bit past that and just talking about the impacts that we were aiming for. So of course, we had the interdisciplinary research program, of which 2 of those activities are here. And the third one was based in Oxford, was focused on law, AI and law. The second one, Stephen pointed out, was the collaborative research and development program that Innovate UK led, which is around developing the new technologies and supporting businesses. The third strand came a little bit later as we were talking with the funded activities, and it really became clear that data access and data sharing and understanding the data was actually a key component that we needed to focus on. And you'll be hearing more from the activities in that space. And of course, we have the network, the AI for Services network, which is helping to organize today. And then we had an international strand, which unfortunately, due to a global pandemic, we did have to look at it and rethink about how to understand our role and make the connections in this space. We also saw that most of the impacts, what the differences or the benefits were probably that we could measure, were going to be within the lifetime of the program, which makes sense because the people who were funded in the collaborations are the ones who are most likely going to see the benefits because you're living, breathing, and working together in this space. So our evaluation so far has been focused on that, but helping us to understand the potential and where we think that's going to be showing to us. So like a big dotted arrow about where that's indicating that we're likely to go. So we framed it around economic impact. We were looking at, so what's the kind of pounds and pences of the benefits of the program, kind of within the challenge timeframe up to plus within 1 year after it ends. We also thought that there would be a good impact across wider sector engagement and adoption. So it's not just within this, but are we going to see this diffuse, or are we going to see the networks grow and expand to other people who maybe not directly funded as part of the program? We have, for those of you in the business side, in UK Research and Innovation, we don't call them universities, we call it research organizations. So those that are eligible to apply for the academic or the research grants within that, we thought there'd be benefits to the universities that are involved. And of course, universities have been embedded throughout the program within the different calls, with potentially new licenses or patents and spin-outs and increasing in jobs as well. And the social impact, which is always a little bit harder to measure within such a short time frame. But really, if people are thinking about the ethics or the unintended consequences of using data or AI, you're already starting to sort of on that indication side is thinking about, well, what benefit does that have for the public or for the taxpayer within this, but also making things maybe more accessible to them or maybe more efficient and effective. And of course, being from the social sciences and as a research council side, got to think about the academic impact as well. What's the new knowledge and how is that knowledge being created and used and who is that knowledge for? Of course, as a good social scientist, always happy to have chats around what does knowledge mean in this space. I see my colleagues are smiling at me. We did have, of course, as I said, this leads to the view of we're trying to get the indicators for the longer term impact, but I won't be focusing on that today. But hopefully you could see that that's the journey that we're on. Our evaluation of the program continues until the end of this year, and we'll be hopefully setting us up so we can come back in a few years' time and look and see what are the benefits and the changes. So just talking about wider sector engagement and adoption within this space. When we looked at there's a lot on this slide, but I think what's really been interesting is as an organization who hasn't really engaged with the sectors and the sector's not really engaging with us, is I think we really found an appetite to do that. And we had, quite across from all the sectors were interested in coming to us, but also the technology providers. So I think what's important, while the numbers might seem a bit small in this particular one, and this is particularly only focused on the collaborative R&D and the data access projects where we had that, but we've been finding out that there's a lot of diffusion and reaching beyond that, so the networks of networks that are created. And of course, we've had participation by many different sizes of business, which particularly interesting is micro and small, which is showing that the growing market that we have in this space. And we've also had participation, although fundamentally 50% is London-based, which is probably natural from where the professional business services sit. But we actually have had collaboration across the UK, all the way across within that space. So I think it's a helpful way to show that from a wider sector engagement of thinking about the impacts of what the differences that we're doing is, I think we're saying we're stimulating the new networks and we're going to be tracking about what difference and where those benefits have gone. To quote Alistair, where that flame has been keeping alive and is it growing into other little flames around it? Sorry, I'm probably stop with the campfire metaphor now. Another example is our AI for Services network. Again, right from the start, we started thinking about we don't want to just create siloed activities. We want to think about how do we bring them together and working, but how do you create a network where no network exists? That was a challenge because it wasn't just on a single sector, it was cross-sector, it was also across universities, across engineering and the social science space primarily. How do we grow that? And credit to the KTN, to Innovate UK's KTN, they've been really focused on growing that membership. So beyond the reach of our actual activities, we have over 1,400 members now within the network with 500 introductions made. So again, it's about tracking where something goes. We always thought this was going to take time, and the network is going to continue to run at least again until close to the end of the year as we try to keep those collaborations and sharing of the insights and the knowledge alive. So speaking about the academic impact, about the new knowledge base that we've created, I think for me, one of the most exciting bits as a social science funder is we know that a lot of social scientists weren't engaging very much with business on our grant applications, but also businesses themselves aren't aware that social science exists. They might know about different disciplines, management and business studies potentially, but actually how do we create those new networks? So in our call that we had is we made business collaboration mandatory within the applications that were coming from the university. And as a result, I mean, for me, I'm quite, they may not seem big to you, but for me, as somebody who works a lot in the funding space, a really significant step change in engaging over 300, close to 400 businesses by the research program. And talking about how we help and shape firm strategy and performance, which we've been talking about is actually how do the humans take this on and how does the business work and how do you de-risk and how do you think about the skills and all of those other things that people in business will understand. It's not just about just lifting a technology and taking it in. You have to understand how it works in your organization and how ready you are to actually use it and how much it fits together. So again, some numbers about 208 participants from 36 firms involved in design sprints. We've got a business model innovation toolkit that will be presented just after lunch today for people to see, and it's being deployed and being used to help businesses think around business model innovation. We've got we've got a new continuing professional development, a new CPD training on AI and law through the Oxford grant with over 500 professionals trained to date, and they've started up a new Master's in Science on Computer Sciences and Law. We also have our Loughborough colleagues here that will be talking on the different panels. Chris, again, about, we've already heard from Technology about the kind of innovations across the different sectors that they've been working with and in the businesses. And I'll have a slide at the end about some of the impacts on the thinking that's been happening there. And of course, access to data has been a really important one. And the England and Wales court judgments, I think it's fair to say it took them quite a long time to get access to that data because of the challenges of working in the government data space, but it was brought out and made available for the first time for analysis, and they've been building and working on what does that data tell us in that space. I think the other lens about this, about just the new knowledge, it's also helped our academic community understand the types of questions to be asking and the type of challenges and that businesses face. So really helping to pivot and think about not just in the theoretical side, but the applied side is how do I have actionable insights and what sort of questions do you have that we should be considering? And I think across that we've been developing a broader community in the social science and the researcher space, connecting up with the engineering. So from my side, again, a nice bit of that sort of that networking aspect and really challenging on the ethical side. And of course, the final bit is the feedback loop to us and giving Stephen and myself and the team, Luke, who's sitting somewhere as part of the team as well, and Daniel, who's been on this from ESRC, helping to give us insights into the sector challenges and how can we help and where can we create those networks. Finally, on the economic impact, the thing that Treasury is very interested in and our governing body, BEIS, is interested in, is actually have we been able to increase the leverage more funding for research and development? So our initial hypothesis, I think, was that out of the 20 or the 18 million pounds we'd be investing directly in that space, we'd leverage about 12 million. A pioneer, we weren't really sure, and we've definitely exceeded that. So there's been definitely showing that there's an appetite for working together, and we also, of course, know that government funding and UKRI can help de-risk the investment, and we're starting to now see that. So again, these aren't all completed numbers, but this is the journey through, and that's, as I said, is within the life of the project. So this is quite exciting for us. We're seeing about 14, so we had 12.5 million in direct co-investment realized across the entire program, including from all of the strands that we've already flagged, with close to 15 in follow-on research and development realized, and that's our evaluation estimate at the moment. And I also think what's been really interesting is on the increase in the business value is that we're seeing already over 100 million has been raised by 25 SMEs, and we're expecting that to grow. So again, tracking that longer term will be of real interest to us about how we can help stimulate in that space. And 5 of the small medium enterprises that have been acquired, which is really great, and other ones are independently applying for more money, which again, it shows that we've hopefully started to stimulate more engagement in R&D in this space. And the final slide that I have here is just a little bit pulling all of that together. A lot of these numbers I've already gone over, but I think what's been really interesting is about 90% of the participants, and that includes, from the researchers, the businesses, any, government people in the collaborations, have reported improved skills and capabilities. Now, actually, that is definitely an impact is when you gain a new skill, and that's been really telling about how well designed some of the, that the collaborations have been and how hard the partners in these have worked together and recognizing where you get shared skills or new skills and capabilities. I think also, again, as I was saying, Technology, the many white papers, they've been absolutely involved in getting heavily into the sectoral publications and the trade publications and sharing those insights. All of them have been, but I think particularly drawing in that knowledge base and turning it into actionable knowledge and understanding rather than just a theoretical base. So we're looking to see again is where are people using that knowledge and how is it being applied across there. And I think for us as a pioneer, as a bit of a summary, is we were very oversubscribed. I think unexpectedly oversubscribed to the calls that we had, and I'd say that when we first started looking at this, about 80% of the participants had actually never really engaged with UKRI or Innovate UK in the past, and that's, I think, showing again introduction of ourselves, we were clearly a hard-to-reach audience for the sector, so we're helping to bring together and help them navigate through the systems of funding, which of course are very simple and not complex at all, right? Anybody who's ever been through that. I'm just going to pause now for a video where I think it definitely shows this coming together. And regulation was one of the data access activities that we've got funded. So I'm going to hand over to our...
Technology is changing society and it's changing regulation. Businesses need to change their business models, they need to change their services, and they need to change their products. But to do that, they need to adopt technology. There are things that stand in their way, and some of these things are regulation that must exist, like data privacy, like competition, like how they collaborate with each other. We want to enable the sharing of insight, but not the sharing of data. The data should stay where it is. So we have developed a decentralized infrastructure, which is a network between computers, where effectively the data stays in the computer under the control of the data holder, and the algorithm comes to the data, takes the insight out, but nothing else of the data. The cleverness of our AIR platform is the 10 capabilities that are all out of the box, which is the AIR platform. Let's think about the big challenges that we're facing. And let's take the topic of health. We need to gather as much data as possible from international patients and from different hospitals talking to each other to find the best way to deal with a healthcare issue. What the AIR platform allows them to do is to share that information with each other through a network of computers talking to each other while the privacy is preserved. So what does that mean in practice? These types of people who have these underlying conditions are more likely to be adversely affected by the virus. Don't care about the names of the people, I do care to know what that disease is. If we can take another example, for example, in insurance, how does an insurance know how it's going to calculate premiums for climate when it doesn't know what the climate is doing? Not a single insurer is getting all of those data points. So they need to work together to create better products for their customers and to be more financially resilient. We thought about all of the other capabilities that we had to build into the platform in order to enable responsible data access, together with responsible AI, together with regulating technology, all through systems.
Whilst we recognise that AI and data are the future, we must recognise that we need to get the governance right. The platform is built on 3 fundamental concepts. You've got data, you've got algorithms, and the computations that happen from these. The platform essentially manages how these interact with each other, who interacts with them, when and in what fashion. Once you automate these, you've got automated governance structures on this. If you apply policies to this, you've got regulation. If you can demonstrate that you're compliant with these policies through auditing, you've got compliance by design or by infrastructure. So automated governance or regulation or privacy preserving data access all rely on a number of technologies, some of them being differential privacy, federated learning, blockchain technology, smart contracts. We recognize not everyone has the technical competence to kind of use these technologies. So what we've done is packaged all these complexities into one unified platform that allows someone to get up and running in 10 minutes. So you've got automated governance, regulation, compliance at a click of a button.
The technology that we have built is revolutionary, and it can deliver benefits across society, across different sectors, and in the biggest problems that we have, including climate. When it comes to revolutionary technology, adoption is always a challenge. Customers are human and they are risk averse. And when it comes to regulation, there are a lot of sticks and there are not enough carrots. So if they try something out and they fail and some data is leaked, they have catastrophic repercussions. What we have to do is put in place programs that support the early adoption of innovative technology that de-risks it for the first customers. For us, Innovate UK funding was very important because it was validation that what we were building was important for society and for the whole ecosystem. That was particularly true because we are building an ecosystem around collaboration. So being able to go to anyone within that ecosystem and say we're Innovate UK funded to solve a big problem that you all have was really important for us.
Thank you very much. And I think that video just shows a lot of what we were talking about. It brings together so many aspects around the partnership model, the understanding of the challenge, the governance structures, and particularly right at the end, the unintended consequences or the disbenefits of data being used wrong or leaks, et cetera, and how you de-risk and how you support for the benefit of all and benefit for the public. So quite a summary actually about what we've been trying to achieve as a program, and quite inspiring personally I find. Just one more slide then on reflections, because we've talked about what the program has done. But as I said, it was a pioneer, and the question is you know, we had at the beginning is there appetite for this? And we've demonstrated, I think, that yes, there is, which is a really interesting, and where do we go next, which hopefully we'll be talking about at the end, and how do we keep those flames going around, as Alistair said, so that we can continue on with sharing of it, because we've created something now, and how does that expand out? I think what's also been, as a reflection, between Steve and I and Luke and Daniel who've been involved in the program, is Innovate UK and ESRC working together. This was one of the first times we've really partnered as organizations as well. And I think what's really been a key benefit for this is it has absolutely brought new partnerships and new ways of thinking across the sectors. And it's really influencing how ESRC is thinking around the potential for social science and business to work together. And we've got a number of as an organization, as ESRC, a number of pilot programs to see about how can we continue to encourage the connections across this sector, but also in many sectoral spaces. It also means, I think, we're thinking around the adoption challenge right from the start, and thinking about, as Stephen was saying, about the humans involved in this and the businesses, and trying to create that ecosystem thinking, or the systems approach to understanding how to take something on board. So for us, I think, you know, working together, we've been learning how do we shape the calls, and how do we shape the engagement, and how do we create the networking spaces for people to come together. I think also for us, it was really important to get the feedback, because this is such a new area, and listening to the CR&D people, or the data access, and listening to the researchers, and listening to the networks that we've been creating has really been shaping how we've been approaching this, especially through the pandemic and the needs of the businesses within this. And it's enabled us to be a bit agile and flexible in how we've been trying to solve the challenges, or at least understand the challenges better, potentially is the way of putting that. And finally, I think it's also been enhancing UK research and innovation as still a relatively young organization, where Stephen has pointed out in the beginning, where we've come together. It's actually helping us understand the potential that we have as an organization to work in multi-sector, multidisciplinary spaces, and bringing in the government, the regulation lens, the sectoral lens, the technology lens, the business, and the university. You know, it's quite simple and, you know, not complex at all in this space. And we've been learning a lot and feeding that back internally. So that is all that I had to say, and I think I'm handing now over to Tim. Tim, you've got, I guess, a good 55 minutes for the panel, and I think through the magic of our colleagues and our fantastic AV colleagues supporting us, you've been mic'd up. So if you'd like to come up with the panel.
Hello, so good morning everyone. My name's Tim Vorley. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean at Oxford Brookes University. I'm one of the research leads on the projects that have been discussed this morning. So it's my pleasure to chair the panel, and I will be looking around the room hoping that you guys will be contributing with questions as we go. But to give you all a bit of a chance, I will kick off with some questions and ask the panel to introduce themselves. When we do have the break, please make sure that you take the opportunity to kind of engage with all of the stands next door. Certainly come along. You can get a free coffee cup from our stand, as well as some other bits and pieces. And you can also learn all about the work that we've been doing on the project as well. So do that. And if you're online, hard luck. In terms of the next 50 odd minutes, what I'm going to do is, like I say, I'm going to go around and ask the panel to introduce themselves, not in the order that they've sat, helpfully, but I will then move on. All of these folks have been involved with the programme in different ways, and I think that one of the key things for me has been that collaboration, working as an academic actively with industry partners, with regulators, and with other academics to try and, as Mel said, bring new knowledge to the table, but also to do things that are interesting, to do things that are relevant to the sectors that we've been working with, and hopefully advance the nature of what the sector is doing around AI, and particularly in our case, the phrase that we've come to use, which is around AI readiness. So I'm going to go to Seamus first, if I may. If I could ask you just to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your engagement with the programme.
Perfect. So, Seamus Ray. I normally like half an hour to talk about myself, as you know. But, so I'm the CEO of Engine B, which is a purpose-driven, profit-second organisation. So we are profit-orientated, but our purpose is about opening up data, especially corporate data, and orchestrating that into a common data model, so that actually professional services, legal, accounting, and insurance can access corporate data in a standard way. So when earlier on when it was discussed about open banking, etc., think about us as open banking equivalent for corporate data. That's the easiest way to do it.
Okay, no, that's fabulous. And I can attest to the purpose-driven aspect, having been involved with one of the projects with Seamus as well. So I'm going to go to Chris on the far end, if I can, next. Chris.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. Chris Holland from Loughborough University, where I'm Professor of Information Management. Excuse my voice, I'm recovering from COVID, but I am fully recovered. Don't take 3 steps backwards. But,
if you notice, the fourth chair is slightly...
No, fully recovered, apart from my voice. And I've retained my sense of smell and taste. So I've worked at the interface of business and digital technology for over 30 years, firstly at Manchester Business School. I've been a visiting international professor at Munster University in Germany, and now I'm based at Loughborough University. During that time, I've worked in the broad areas of enterprise systems, supply chain management, financial systems, particularly cash management and global payment systems. And then over the last 10 to 20 years, I've focused on much more on consumer use of technology, looking at areas like digital marketing strategy and focusing on new technologies such as the commercial applications of AI and big data. And my role here today is really as co-PI with Professor Alistair Milner of the Tech NGI project, where I've led on many of the strategically focused aspects of that project, looking at areas like, for example, business model analysis, competitive advantage, and the ethical dimensions to AI systems in insurance.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. And again, the Tech NGI stand next door, you can find out more about the work that they've been doing with Zamarat and Alistair here as well. So thanks and welcome, Chris. Melissa, I'm going to come to you next, if I may. So tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Melissa Khalid. I'm the Professional Standards Director at the Chartered Insurance Institute. So a professional body for the insurance as well as the financial planning sectors. So kind of straddling between the business world and the academic world. And we have over 125,000 members in 150 countries around the world, and we award globally recognized qualifications. Now, my role is focused on the professional standards, ethics, and conducts of all of our professional members, which is why I'm very interested in ensuring that the technology that's currently being developed in insurance is responsible. And so that's why I joined the advisory panel for this Next Generation program, and really excited to be a part of it and make all the impact that Melanie outlined to you earlier.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And our fourth guest, who it's not a gate crashing, although not named on the side, Hilary Allen, who's been involved.
I'm just going to make up where I'm from.
You tell us.
I'm Hilary Smith-Allen, and I've had a number of touch points with the fund. I'm particularly sitting on this panel, bringing that regional UK perspective. So a number of hats, best hoodie in the room for Super Tech Cluster. I'm also the professional services policy lead for the West Midlands, covering the 3 complicated LEP area. Mel, we can share notes on complexities if you want around funding later in a regional context, but I've also been involved in the fund through the Next Generation Services project with Professor Tim Vorley, stood next to you, for Brooks University, and also with the Data Access Fund as an assessor. So a number of touch points, but bringing that regional perspective to this panel.
Super, thank you very much for all introducing yourself. So I guess from my side, and the interesting thing is that we have seen a lot of things move. We've seen the industrial strategy come and go. We've seen the innovation strategy come in. The plan for action from Innovate UK as well. So there's a hell of a lot moving in this space. And I think that we've, between us, contributed in many different ways to what's gone on. And as a beneficiary of some of the funding, Seamus, and to come to you first, if I may, I mean, Engine B is a prime example of, a disruptor in audit, which is a sector not particularly known for innovation. So I wonder if maybe you could start off by just saying about some of the challenges of operating in this space, and kind of a little bit about the journey and what next.
Yeah, so I'm going to be careful not to be rude about my clients, obviously. So we focus on audit first, but actually we're doing audit, tax, legal, and so we're rolling through different industries, if you like. The problem with audit, of course, is it's a kind of crossover of regulation and the partnership model. And the partnership model means that there's no change, right? So if you look at audit, it survived the dot-com crisis by actually not getting involved in the dot-com crisis because they couldn't change fast enough to get involved. So here we are trying to kind of go, you guys need to change, and I say guys because I'm well informed about the pale, stale male situation in the Big Four. You guys need to change rapidly, and actually you need to do it in the next 3 or 4 years because technology is rapidly changing. The amount of data around is huge. So I would say the issue with audit is that they have a margin problem. So you'll all read the Big Four, in fact, everybody in the accounting industry, they talk about their profit per partner, and you'll see it stayed pretty much stable over the last kind of 15, 20 years. But if you actually look at the margin relative to revenue, then the margin's in terminal decline. It has been since 2006, when it was about 35, 36%, and every year it goes down, and it's now about 17%. And everybody always says to me, it's going to change next year, don't worry, and sure enough, it doesn't. If you look through the accounts, and the auditors don't look at their own accounts, then you'll see that the revenue per billable member of staff is going up at half the rate of inflation, and their costs are going up at inflation. So one of the Big Four will go bankrupt by 2025 if something doesn't change. Right? That's quite a burning platform. So now we're seeing some starting to shift because of the burning platform, but there's still quite a lot of denial. But what I would say is tax, which we're doing a lot of work in tax, the digitization in tax is kind of a global phenomenon, and that's kind of showing a lot of growth. And then legal, there's a lot of work going on in legal. There isn't the same margin pressure, there isn't the same burning platform. But the regulator and the courts are starting to go, why aren't you using technology? So I think that's a good driver. And I think in legal, I think the pressure is coming from the general counsels rather than the legal partners. So I think that's a slightly different industry. But
it's the interesting dynamic about what's being driven internally versus externally as well, the client one. You mentioned there the Big Four and potentially how the Big Three is the threat on the horizon. Yeah. But in addition to those big players, I think one of the things that we've seen certainly through some of the project work we've been involved with is the importance of mid-tier firms. Yep. So I just wondered on that, how ready are they for innovation and where that's coming from as well? Yeah,
so I think I'll break it down into, there's the mid-tiers who are actually quite large organisations. So if you take, I won't say the name, but they're kind of like number 7. They're actually globally a $6 billion organisation, so they're not a small company. They tend to be quite good at technology, actually. The problem they've got is they're competing with the Big Four, and the Big Four have publicly announced $10 billion worth of investment into technology, and of course the mid-tiers don't have the same spending capacity. Look, one of our purposes as Engine B is to create interportability of systems and the right environment so that actually other innovators can start building great tax audit tools, DNA tools, etc., on top of the platform, and they become available to everybody all the way through from mid to small. So we're obsessed by the mid-tiers and the small organizations. So we have an advisory committee which has big four people on it, mid-tiers and small firms, making sure that everything we do is actually about everybody in the market and not just for the people with the big bucks.
No, absolutely. And I'll come back to you on the ecosystem piece and what you're doing to kind of crowd in a moment. Chris, if I can jump to you next, kind of one of the points that Seamus alluded to there in the kind of transformation is around the business models. In the legal sector, we think about the billable hour, we think about the kind of the return per partner when we're thinking in audit and accounting. What are we seeing in terms of the kind of the business model transformation piece? And again, kind of reflecting maybe on the project that you've had on the insurance sector.
Certainly. So I think it's important first to think about the nature of AI systems in insurance before you look at the detailed analysis using business model theory. So if you think about AI technology, what distinguishes AI technology from earlier transactional systems is that they are, by definition, adaptive algorithms. So the core technology is all about algorithms and data. But if you look at AI technology just in terms of that technical perspective, you miss all of the rich digital context, business context, value generation, and also regulatory and ethical context to this. So one of the, I suppose, characteristics of our project is that we've always looked at AI systems and explicitly considered the AI technology and how it relates to the digital MIS context, which for an incumbent firm will be the legacy systems that they're operating. It would also look at the business context, the individual business processes, the product innovation, the value creation, and also the legal and regulatory environment. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, the reason that business model theory is so powerful is because business model theory allows you to juggle those different variables together in a systematic manner. So it allows you to model the interactions between technology, between processes, how that creates value. So for example, in the customer journey within an insurance company, every single aspect of that customer journey is affected by, can be enabled and facilitated by AI. That creates new forms of value. That creates new types of products, such as behavioral insurance. What business model theory allows you to do is to capture that in a systematic way and describe and analyze it. Remembering that the most important stage of analysis here is simply to describe what's happening. And when you describe that in detail, you very quickly realize the importance of data, for example, in value creation, particularly the flow of data within the insurance firm, and also the way insurance firms exchange data with their economic partners and also their customers. So my other point, coming back to you, really your direct question, answering your question now I've done the preamble, there's an assumption that's often made here that the use of AI technology in insurance is all about disruption. And that's just wrong, it's false. In the work that we've done, we think that only around 10% of the examples could be described as disruptive. What we found is that there are many examples of AI technology where AI is being used to improve existing business models. So if you're an incumbent insurance firm, you'll seek to use AI technology in a defensive manner. And that doesn't necessarily mean completely changing the way you do business. That can mean, for example, using AI to make better use of your existing data, which I would term automation. It may involve the creative use of new forms of big data, such as behavioral or IoT data, wearables, for example, or GPS data, creating new services which augment what you're already doing. That's strategic augmentation. And then, of course, you've got the disruptors, which, because of their nature, tend to attract a lot of the attention. So that work on the business model typology was published with one of our insurance partners, Willis Towers Watson, and we set out the logic of that if anyone wishes to pursue that and look at that in more detail.
And you talked there about the kind of the business theory, and I agree, and that the academics in the room will probably be interested to see where that goes. One of the things that I guess from my perspective and the experience of our project, when we've gone into businesses, keeping it almost as simple as possible, trying to think about kind of how do we talk to businesses, we kind of break it down around 3 areas. So around the offering, is that changing what they sell, how they do it, the configuration, it can enhance what they do. It's not necessarily about doing lots of different things. And also the experience, because I think at the end of this, all of these businesses have clients, and it's about trying to ensure they're providing the best possible service. And I think that through Engine B's offer and others, we're seeing that becoming a more competitive landscape as a result of that. So, I mean, I just wondered, could you tell us a little bit about some of those businesses that you've worked with? What does it look like, business model innovation? What are some of the things that we're seeing in a kind of a tangible, hands-on way?
Sure. So if I take, for example, the automation, use of AI to improve existing business models, probably the best example there would be something like robotic process automation to simply improve policy management. And that doesn't attempt to change the overall business model. It's simply saying, this is how we're currently doing business. How do we reduce the cost per transaction? If you look at new forms of big data, for example, sensor data where you're measuring temperature or humidity in buildings, then you start to create new kinds of possibilities, because then it becomes much more dynamic. You're not just measuring risk, you've got the opportunity to mitigate and reduce risk by intervening in what clients are doing. And you've also got, for example, in behavioural insurance, in car insurance, it's not just a question of saying, this is your score, Professor Milner, you're a very safe driver, congratulations. Somebody else, you're a terrible driver, we rate you as 20. You actually give advice and say, this is why we think you're heading for an accident. Have you considered doing this? And that's much more about strategic augmentation, moving towards a disruptive influence. And then I think you've got the radically different approaches. And I suppose if you wanted to pin me down and say, okay, which companies can we look at for examples of radical transformation where the companies are really seeking to disrupt a market? 2 very nice examples that we've written up on digital transformation would be Ping An and Tesla Insurance. Ping An in particular, where they're collecting data across a number of ecosystems to continually evolve their AI systems, which then gives them access to more data, creating what's been termed an AI data flywheel effect, i.e. a network effect, where the successful companies have the potential to grow much faster than the market. And they take what I would call a digital-first approach, where the assumption is every single part of the operation will be digital and data-driven. It isn't a question of saying, should we keep the legacy? The default position is, how do we do this with the most advanced AI systems? And to achieve that, you've got to have that mindset in terms of the leaders and also the technical capabilities to make it happen.
I think it's a really interesting point on the mindset and the reference there to insurance, and this idea of, certainly for me at the moment, I don't know how others feel, having a black box in your car that is determining it's something I'm not entirely comfortable with, and that might be a reflection on my driving more than anything else. The one thing I suppose that mindset does become important at the organisational level as well, and through some of the things that we've been looking at, we're certainly beginning to see the kind of the apprehensive outlook of partners or kind of chief execs within the sectors we've been looking at in accountancy and audit and legal, and from what you're saying, it's the same in insurance, that there is that kind of need to change that mindset and that culture of the organisation towards this. So, Melissa, I'm going to draw you into the conversation at this point, and I've got Melissa's business card, so I'm not making this up. On this, we talk about the Chartered Insurance Institute, and the tagline there is standards, professionalism and trust. And I think that that's a really interesting thing in this space, because what are the roles and the importance of this in trying to kind of see those members adopt? What's the role of the Institute in this sense in trying to support and promote the adoption of AI and help with the future of the industry?
Yes, and I think it's worth going back to that strap line because that underpins our purpose, which is to build public trust in the insurance profession. So how do we do that with this burgeoning technology changing the landscape, disrupting it? What do we tell our members in order for them to secure the trust of customers who feel, some customers are embracing the rush to digitalize, they're embracing InsurTech, and others are more skeptical or more reluctant. So how can we help our members build trust? So some of the ways we are doing that are, firstly, we have a power to convene. So we convened experts, we convened the main trade bodies in insurance, we brought in an insurance ethical consultant, and we created the Digital Ethics Forum in 2019. And we published one of the first professional bodies to do so, which is our Code of Digital Ethics for Insurance. So I urge you to look up CII Code of Ethics. It's our landing page, and it goes straight into our digital Code of Ethics. And there's also a practical guide with real examples of where things could potentially go wrong and how you can guidance on how to avoid that, mitigate that for your customers. So that's something we did a couple of years ago, which I'm very proud to say has been cited by the UK Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. It's been cited by the World Economic Forum. And I'm sitting here today talking to you about it as well, which is great. We want to just get it and promote it as widely as possible. Some of the other things that we do as a professional body, we have a charter. We are a chartered body, we have a royal charter, which means that we can actually charter individual professionals and firms. So we actually developed a new charter title for the MGA sector, because the InsurTech sector are choosing the MGA business model as their preferred model. And we want to be able to give people dealing with MGAs that ability to say, oh, that MGA is chartered. So that means, they have, they're aligned with the Chartered Insurance Institute, they're aligned with its ethical principles and their code of digital ethics and so on. And so we rolled this out just before the start of the pandemic in 2020. So any InsurTech firms out there who have been trading for 3 years and are putting people through qualifications with us can apply. Those who are cover holders at Lloyd's can be fast-tracked and after 1 year trading history. So I'd urge you to go on to CII website and find out more about that. So I talked about the thought leadership role we have at the CII, and the other thing I wanted to mention is the learning that we've developed, because recognizing that there are incumbents we talked about who, may be slow moving, and maybe not as slow moving as audit, but some of them, they don't have that, InsurTechs are filled with people who are data scientists, whereas insurance companies, at least until recently, are not. So we've developed, in conjunction with the Southampton Data Science Academy, a specific course designed to teach the fundamentals of AI in insurance. I actually took the course. It's an 8-week course, and it really helps anyone to understand what AI is and how it can be deployed in insurance, and then you work on a specific business case study so that you can apply it to a business problem that you're dealing with. So it's really, really practical course for our professional market.
It's a really interesting thing, almost about demystifying AI. One of the big things that certainly through the project that I led, we spent an awful amount of lot of time talking to firms on the design sprint, trying to actually explain what AI is. It's the fact that it's not something that's going to see you become an AI-enabled firm from the off. How do you apply these solutions in particular ways, and to what particular problems? So to Chris's point on the business model, there's often a very narrow focus, so bringing them up to speed. The one thing that obviously isn't on your business card is regulation. And I just wondered if you could perhaps reflect that obviously with the nature of standards, with that kind of the trust, the professionalism that the Institute brings, what's needed from the regulators in this space to actually ensure that AI is adopted? Can it all be done by virtue of standards and trust, or do we need regulation?
Wow, do we need regulation? Well, the regulator thinks so. There's been a whole raft of new regulation, those of you who follow this, the FCA around the new consumer duty, and I think the sector's still getting to grips with some of the earlier regulation applying to senior managers' conduct, and also the need for raising the standards of how to deal with customers and ensuring that insurers acting in their best interests. All of this regulation is fairly newish, and it's a lot to take on. Has the regulator, addressed some of the risks around AI and insurance? I think it's trying to do so with the sandbox, and it's inviting insurtechs to be a part of that, but also seeing what how it develops, what are the risks there. But I think there was a gap, which is why the CII, where I work, decided it was important to develop this code of digital ethics. So it doesn't have the force of regulation, but it's applicable to our members and our corporate members, and we think it fills a gap that there is currently in the regulatory space.
Okay, no, thank you for that. And Seamus, yep.
What types of regulations in this context? What type of regulations would we be thinking about in this context?
Okay, so for those of you that didn't hear on the other quarter, what types of regulation? And I guess, Melissa, would you be happy to?
Well, I think it goes back to what you were just touching on earlier about a black box and being nervous about that. Why are people nervous about these things? Because they don't understand what's happening to their data. We have data protection laws in this country and in other countries around the world, but there's still this lack of clarity and problems with privacy, with access to data. I think the speaker we had on the Gavin earlier was, touching on this, but I think it's something that I still, there's a lot of discussion around gender bias in algorithms. So I think there's a lot of issues to be tackled there. So that's, I think, areas where regulation is going to move into very soon.
I think one of the other interesting things on regulation, I guess, in the space that we encountered as a project was regulation is not necessarily the problem. The interpretation and relation between AI and regulation becomes one of the issues. And I think that how that can be overcome is through the information, the sandboxes and the like in that position allow firms to experiment almost without fear. And by working with the regulators, we're seeing that enables, again, progression in a way that if it was being done independently, perhaps wouldn't necessarily happen as quickly. I'm going to go to Hilary now, who has become a legitimated member of the panel on the slide. So congratulations on that. I suppose with regards to Supertech West Midlands and thinking, certainly when we started the project, and I think Alistair and Chris would probably say the same, the professions are highly London-centric. We're now seeing, obviously, with the levelling up agenda, beginning to form and understand more about what that means. There is a kind of focus outside of London. Obviously, Supertech West Midlands has emerged. It's been a key part from the LEP. We've seen it growing in stature. But I wonder if you could just kind of tell us, perhaps a little bit from your perspective, the importance that AI and some of the work you've been doing around the no-code accelerator in really kind of putting the West Midlands on the map with professional service?
Yeah, I'll start a little bit of the journey there then, because it's been a 30-year overnight phenomenon, the professional services in the West Midlands. So I've been around this region long enough for the professional services to not be in the economic plan when the local enterprise partnerships came to existence and after regional development agencies were disbanded. So we weren't in it, and there was a bit of a moment of like, oh, don't forget about that. So we got in, and then it was in, but not a priority, but not resourced, to where we are now, which is in what was the local industrial strategy, soon to be planned for growth. I think we're going to make it through that policy change again, but being high priority and high resource. So what's going on there, and why does that matter in the context of an English region? Well, West Midlands, A's got a terrible brand, don't repeat, don't tweet. But when I try and describe it, I think Birmingham, and then sort of draw a little bit around and taking Coventry and the cities of Wolverhampton. But professional services is very highly clustered around Birmingham. And that patch is the size of a European country. It's about the economic equivalent of Croatia and Portugal. It's over 100 billion. It's bigger than the devolved nations. And within that, a third of that is professional financial services. So then that's a bit weird. Brand West Midlands, I think it's terrible because we're associated with cars, with manufacturing, and absolutely we are. And the precision engineering that goes on here is part of the reason that they have started to cluster here. But we have a globally relevant centre. It's full service. The evidence is that the process we went through in creating the local industrial strategy provide for that. And it's grown over that 30 years pretty much without any intervention. So that's why it wasn't resourced. That's why it wasn't a priority, because it's doing it on its own. So these are very nimble, very agile businesses. They're not, they're low capital. They're very easy to move. So what then is going on? What's that change? Well, that change is kind of twofold, and it's intrinsically linked to this agenda. That innovation piece, that technology disruption, the fact that consumers want services to be like they feel like their other apps, like their general life. I don't want to have that pain of interacting with a lawyer, or the worst points, if I can avoid it, right? That's a good place to be. That's the starting point. So if you've got that pressure and you have a lot of it in your region and it's all good value, good high quality jobs, then you're starting to think about what are the threats and what are the opportunities that go with that. So that's the policy context as to why we care about this agenda. And this was simultaneous with what UKRI was doing on a national level. So we've been very, very interested in this fund and seeing what it's going to do. We've also been really interested and saddened that there aren't enough applications coming from this centre. So what's going on there? And that's part of that picture. There's not enough applications. There's not enough relationships between universities. And we have some fantastic institutions here. And they're working nationally and playing their part, but it somehow isn't delivering it. And then that links to the other policy driver, which is inclusive growth. And we talk about it like it's just a given in the region. We're super diverse, over 180 nationalities represented plus. And that's just life here. I went to Northern Ireland last week, and I haven't been, because I haven't travelled, I didn't see anybody, but I've never been in such a room that's 100% white. 100%, and it was shocking, and I found it culturally shocking. But it really emphasised that difference here. But that's an asset because innovation and diversity of thought are so intrinsically linked, which is why we're seeing more and more growth and post-COVID as firms are looking at their cost base and thinking, well, where does work happen? And that talent pool is absolutely part of our regional assets. So we have to do this in a way which is inclusive growth, because what we're seeing at the moment is the firms are coming. Are they really employing our people here? Is the innovation happening here? So that's what's happening. And I think the most recent example, Goldman Sachs moved here, they announced last year. They have 3 times over recruited the number of people, and it's their engineering department. I mean, hands up, who knew that engineering was a thing in services? That was just not the language we used 3-4 years ago. And yeah, it's a third of their global profile is in engineering, and now their biggest centre in the UK is growing out of the West Midlands. So that's why we care about it.
And I mean, you mentioned Goldman there. We've obviously got KPMG with a base, and trying to kind of see the West Midlands become that kind of sticky place, the kind of the cluster for super tech, as well as the kind of the bigger organisations. What about the smaller ones? What is the kind of startup space like?
I mean, place in itself in COVID has just been a really weird place to be in terms of economic. Like, what does it mean if everybody's everywhere and nowhere and you can get into anything literally just by sitting at your own desk? Then thinking about how you grow a region has been quite complicated. and looking at what's the right intervention for us, what's the way to support growth and innovation at those firms, and recognizing that the public sector isn't the go-to place. So one of the reasons we created Supertech is exactly that, branding, the power of brand, that it feels closer to industry, that it's a network as a club, they're not connected enough, so we're putting that bit in, and it has enabled us to make more progress than if we'd approached this in just a pure public sector and our agency way. But then we stood back from some of the statistics, and fintech's very interesting. Fintech has been like a forerunner, and we've seen that, and we've been slow off the mark to fintech here. We've got loads of it, but we didn't really do it in a place-based way. And now we're seeing with the Khalifa review that that levelling up global Britain, that regions really have a role to play. So partly with the interactions with the fund has been about, well, if fintech's kind of doing its thing over there, might law, might insure tech, legal tech. Why is account tech not a thing, right? But yeah, I mean, it's just not even a label, but those other professions, might they go down a similar path? So that's why we're super tech, because it's a super cluster, it's thinking across all of those. It's about the transference, fintech being a forerunner. We don't want to be fintech West Midlands, because I would have to have gone and formed legal tech West Midlands, and prop tech. We think actually, hopefully, UKRI listening, we think prop tech's the next one that's really important to us, and we'd love some support on seeing the disruption in real estate, because it really links to the other pieces around asset management. But what then do we need to do apart from that community piece? And the statistic that stands out from our own research is that the average age of a fintech founder in the West Midlands is 48. That's not unusual in the national picture. But it's white, it's male, it's middle class. And we saw this, didn't we, through our own research, that we're going around the incubators for law and accountancy and insurtech, that what you're seeing with those early stage startups is you need both sides of the picture. You need the domain knowledge, and you need a tech person. And hopefully they meet each other, and hopefully they get along, right? And then the idea starts to build, and then they just get caught at that MVP, building that first technology stage. And that's what's responsible for that demographic. You get to an age, a stage, a profile, a level of toughness with corporate life or a rejection, or you just need to go and scratch the itch. But you have that social capital to be able to move on your idea. So we've been pioneering with no-code and low-code technologies, which are starting to apparently deliver on the promise that you can build anything without coding. It's not there yet, but it is one of the top trends, and we're seeing a number of platforms and things embrace low code and no code at the user interface, but behind the scenes you can actually build things. So we are teaching within FE colleges at the moment, low code, supporting entrepreneurial pathways, but also the employee of the future, self-serving, sitting at that desk, doing that mundane task, be it insurance, accountancy, we all have them. And self-serving and building your own solution at the desk. So we think it's a key skill, but we've also got our own pre-accelerator and literally building MVPs, because we can afford to do it as the public sector a little bit with a bit of grant money to get them over that first stage, that first hump. And what we've seen is the demographics, the age, whatever we cut it, that's changing that pipeline, and we're seeing a different level of inclusiveness coming through. And that's what we think we need to do here. Because if we feed the top of the hopper, then hopefully they're the businesses that scale. They're the businesses that will then engage with universities, etc., and be part of activities like this.
Okay, and thank you for that. I think it's really interesting that Mel mentioned and Stephen mentioned the pioneer nature of the fund. And I think that, therefore, it would infer that this is a beginning. It's certainly been a really important catalyst for moving people together, to trying to change things, and to try and build some of that momentum. I'm going to look to Win and look around the room. We've had the first question, so people need not feel shy about asking other questions. But we've obviously got the panel here. So has anyone got a question that they would like to ask of the panel? This is where I should have planted some earlier, but I didn't manage it. Yes, sir, please. We'll get you the mic.
I'm Clive Grenier from the Royal College of Art. What am I doing here, you might ask? I'm the head of service design, so we design services. And working a lot with AI, actually. Really interesting presentations and fantastic chat. Thank you very much. But two things. The black box thing came up. That was really interesting. And you talked about, Melissa, you talked about the lack of trust in data. But actually, it's about our driving patterns, and we don't want to be found out, isn't it? And what worries me is that a lot of the things we're trying to do with AI might be dashed, I'm looking at my notes, sorry, dashed on the rocks of consumer behaviour or mistrust. And that we at the RCA would say, what's the problem you're trying to solve first? And one of the things I'm looking for here is actually, do we have a good framework for what are the problems? It was mentioned in the first piece, the social impact, things might speed up processes, but that's very vague. Do we have a framework for what are the benefits of AI to businesses and then to end consumers, or how long will it take to find that framework?
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to just take my hat as the researcher and keep that on for a moment. So we were working with Lucy Kimball, who's a professor of design, as part of the project at UAL, absolutely. And one of the things that I guess in trying to do more interdisciplinary research into this and making it applied was exactly that. So we very much use that design sprint framework to try and build an understanding with firms as to the direction that they can go, and actually try and, as I said earlier, demystify, and I think that it is trying to look for that solution to the problem. Chris, I know that kind of through some of the business model stuff that this is an area that you've been engaged with as well.
Absolutely. So the idea that you've articulated there about saying it's really important to say what are we trying to achieve before we get into the nitty-gritty of the technology is very important. So the first observation I would make is that if you're looking at significant innovation in insurance, it's almost certainly going to be information driven. So consumers must be confident about sharing information, because if they can't share that information, it's very unlikely that you can generate the analytical insights, you can't develop flexible products, and there are also price benefits for the consumers. If I come on to your point about the black box, I was a member of IOPA's expert panel on AI and ethics in consumer insurance markets. And IOPA published a report last year with 6 principles, and one of them related to what you've termed the black box problem, which I would describe as transparency and explainability. I think as soon as anyone says to me, oh, it's a black box, I just think they're hiding something. Because the whole point about an AI algorithm is that you should be able to explain how it works. It should be transparent. And as soon as you say it's a black box, it betrays either ignorance or fear, and it's simply unacceptable. And I can't think of any situations in insurance where that can be a legitimate excuse. And if it is given, then that becomes unacceptable to consumers. And I think a major feature or commitment of IOPA was to use their ethical principles around robustness and performance, fairness and non-discrimination, transparency and explainability, and other factors to encourage consumer confidence. And I think that was almost the starting point for it. And that panel had very good representation from UK insurance firms, and it also made, I think, very good use of university-based research, including work from Loughborough.
I'm going to... Yeah, please, and then I'll bring Seamus.
Yeah, fascinating question. And someone once said data is the new oil. And I think if data is the new oil, then insurers are super tankers. They have so much data about us. And traditionally, they're very reluctant to share that data. But as Chris outlined earlier, there could be this brand new business model, and the insurtechs are embracing it, whereby they share that data with customers. And they say, well, you're actually an amazing driver, and you can do this now, and it's going to be much cheaper for you. Or we know so much about your elderly cat, and we can tell you exactly when your cat is going to need surgery. And so here's this data about your cat that you didn't even know about, because and how useful, maybe the cat example isn't the greatest, but how useful it will be if all this data could be used for risk prevention instead of just covering you when the risk crystallizes, but just use it to prevent you from having these escapes of water, from having this damage, from having these collisions, and the disease prevention as well from wearables is phenomenal. So I'd like to just see more of that, and I think that's the responsible use of AI, and also one that could be hugely beneficial and business beneficial too.
Seamus, I know you want to come in, so I'll give you a chance, and if anyone else has got another question, do indicate, and we'll get you the mic in the meantime.
Yeah, so actually I was going to try and pull some things together, because Chris talked about kind of process improvement through AI and then disruption. And I completely agree with that, by the way. I'm not going to have a go, so you'll be glad here. But the work we're doing on kind of data platforms, and you start looking at what some of the companies who we're working with are trying to do, they fold straight into Chris's two scenarios, right? The one is kind of improve the process, and the other is trying to disrupt. And I look at it as that this is about where the point of friction is, right? So we talk about, is it a B2C or a B2B? It's actually a B2P, right, to the person. Where's the person having the first point of friction? So in legal tech, you could sell legal tech to law firms, and that's kind of vaguely interesting. But it'd be much better to actually deliver the legal information and the legal tech to the point of friction, whether it's the consumer going through a divorce, whether it's a mid-ranking manager trying to build a supply chain contract. And actually that going to the point of friction changes things. And then bring it back to your point, that's where we need to educate people about AI. Because the moment they understand, actually, this is what's going to happen, and this is the data they're going to use, and how they're going to use it, etc., then they will embrace the friction being solved at the point of need, rather than going through intermediaries like law firms or accounting firms. So I think it's that they're kind of connected up. We do a lot of work in, obviously, AI, but with knowledge graphs as well. And I think knowledge graphs can go a long way to help explain AI. And I think AI in knowledge graphs, which is where we spend a lot of time, is I think, phenomenally sexy, but I'm quite boring. But actually, I think that whole piece can come together quite neatly, actually.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question on the far table. Thank you.
Name's Peter Wallace, actually an AI expert, and I'm a bit worried about this notion that the black box is somehow a misnomer, because neural nets just don't explain themselves, right? There's just no way to figure out how they make a decision, even when the decision's right. So we actually try to fund a whole bunch of stuff on explainable AI. So I don't think it's the technology that can do it. A second question, well, a point that I'd like to make is to relate a story about my grandfather, who refused to have life insurance because he was betting with somebody about when he was going to die. And I seem to recall a science fiction in which there were insurance companies that would insure you up to a particular date because they knew when you were going to die. Now, are we skeptical about black boxes in cars for that reason? I'm not sure how that relates, but anyway.
I think if I could see the advantage of having a black box and it was certainly more explicit, I may be more willing to have it, regardless of, like you say, the explainable element of it. And I think kind of how you do that. One of the interesting things, certainly since joining Oxford Brookes, and as a colleague in the room, Kevin Maynard, who leads on the Ethical AI Institute at Brookes, and I think that that's another challenge on the explainability. But Chris, I'll bring you in again, and then maybe come to Melissa, because I think it is absolutely about trying to understand that black box misnomer.
Yeah, so maybe I'd better just explain my position more clearly here. I'm not saying it's trivial to explain it, far from it. But what I'm saying is it should be possible. And there are all kinds of creative ways, not least using the technology itself, as you've alluded to. There are counterfactual approaches. So explaining an algorithm doesn't necessarily mean going through every nuance of that adaptive algorithm, every differential equation, every data transition. But at some level, dependent on the proportionality of the risk to the individual, i.e. the application context, it should be possible to explain what's happening. So that would be my position. I suppose that, regarding this question about, do we trust these systems, from my perspective, that's one of the advantages of having strong regulation. That should give confidence to consumers that this is being actively considered and that there are clear regulations in place to set the guidelines, and that companies are compelled, insurance companies and others using this technology are compelled to follow them.
And Melissa, if I could just maybe just open that question up a bit further, because obviously the equivalence of what the black box is as it is applied within the insurance sector by insurers. You've spoken a bit already about how you've tried to do that with members, but how is that received? What have been the challenges in doing that?
Well, underwriting, there's always been this kind of the underwriting philosophy and then the underwriting handbook. And it's a really secret document, and it's not something that traditionally insurers would share with each other. It's very, it's a competitive thing, but it goes back to explainable AI, because if AI is going to be doing the underwriting, do we want to carry on in this secrecy vein? What our Digital Ethics Forum, the guidance produced says no, it should be the underwriting decisions made should be explainable. So if somebody's applying for life insurance, it should be explained to them why their premium's gone up, not just presented with, oh, well, you've got double the risk. Well, why? Is there anything you can do now with wearables and other technology? What can you do to lower your premium? And the interesting company in this space is Vitality, who's encouraging change of behavior to then that impacts on the price of the risk, which, just to me is the way forward. And I think that I have a stat here that by 2025, 20% of insurance sold will be use-based. So that goes back to this idea that, why should you pay for something that if you're not using it? And I think customers will embrace the idea of being monitored, their use being monitored, so they can just pay less. People are willing to trade their data in return for benefit. And I think that's also another place where there's huge benefits both for business and customers.
Okay, I'm going to start to draw the session to a close. I can't see anyone furiously waving, but I am going to go around the panel again, which was by design.
I've got a tenuous link.
So I will permit your tenuous link, and let's start with that. And then I'm going to ask, with that tenuous link, if maybe you could also reflect. I think that one of the things for me, and picking up on the focus of the session around the kind of opportunities and challenges, is within this evolving ecosystem, what do we think needs to happen next? So I'll let you go with your tenuous link, and then I will make you answer the question first.
So my tenuous link was when you were just talking about underwriting, etc., and thinking about big firms and the new technologies and institutions that are trying to go on that journey. We have actually a live challenge program at the moment, BNP Paribas Personal Finance, exactly that, looking at how do they automate and underwrite. So if anybody is in that space and wants to work with one of the larger banks, then please find me after this. That's my shameless plug, because that is innovation, isn't it? Is actually trying to take this and bring it together and help institutions move forwards, and that transferability. So practicing what hopefully I preached about earlier. And the question again, if I may.
So in terms of the ecosystem and what needs to happen to kind next? Of the next step, what's the one thing that we want to leave people thinking about?
Just one thing. Just one. I think it's this intersection between place and people and business is still very unanswered. And I know UKRI and government are very interested in how do we shift this, but how do we shift that within services? This is so nascent. And I think that is the big opportunity. Fintech's ahead, like I said, they're thinking about it, don't yet know how to do it. And when you were talking about law, that's even harder, I think, to do in a regional context. So looking to see how the national and the places and the clusters, it's not just the West Midlands, there are many other clusters around that have a role to play in that. The UK is a cluster, right? The UK is a cluster on a global stage, so we have to get the pieces working together better, and they're not yet. It's still too piecemeal.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I'll go to you next.
Thank you. So my concluding comment is that all insurance companies are technology companies. It's just that some of them have embraced it much more than others. So the term insurtech is sometimes actually quite misleading, because insurtech implies that the new entrants are all technology driven and the incumbents aren't. All insurance companies are using technology. It's the degree of engagement, or what you could call a digital leaders and laggards perspective here. And if you follow through the logic of that, what it means is, from a managerial perspective, companies have got to follow that through in terms of skills and recognise that actually all of their employees need to be at least a part-time technologist. They may not be 50% or 80%, but they have to be 10 or 20%. You can't say, I'm not a technologist, I'm not interested in the technology. Everybody, and that then has implications, important implications for training and growing the capacity for AI knowledge, digital capacity, in order to be able to implement these systems.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank
Melissa.
you.
Yeah, I guess I agree with Chris. It's about training insurance people to be data scientists, but there's also a bit of the reverse, training the data scientists more about insurance, the social value and social good of insurance, which I think boils down to what we should see more of in the future is sharing that data in order to prevent risk. And that could apply right across the board, from personal risk to climate risk. And I think that is where we should be investing in for the future.
Okay, Seamus, I'm going to give you the penultimate word, but I'm going to have the last word. So after you.
So I actually think that I've done a lot of work in legal firms looking at processes and services and accounting firms. And I think actually they're two ends of a continuum. People like to think of them as totally different organizations. And you can see the big four going into legal at the moment as well. So that market without insurance, just legal and accounting, is worth $1.2 trillion a year. And that's figures 3 or 4 years out of date. And I had a famous conversation with Eric Schmidt when I said, AI is going to remove lawyers. And he said to me, every year, Seamus, there'll be more lawyers than there were last year, which is a depressing concept. But I actually think we need to do whatever we can do to open up that market, make the data available in a way which is going to drive more startups, because actually the startups and the people who do the disruption on the edge will start to drive the incumbents to change faster. And I think the market needs to be more competitive. So I think anything from a regulatory point of view, from sandboxes, but also especially labs. We embarrassingly flew over the Midlands and went to Scotland. But we'll make sure we'll take the train next time. So I think actually this has got to be about breaking up the market and opening it up. We can do that through data and innovation, and let's make the legal labs professional services labs rather than legal labs.
No, thank you very much. And I suppose just to add by way to close, that I think for me this is a journey. The whole funding process, the programme with UKRI and ESRC, Innovate on this, has really kind of opened things up. It has started to move things along. I think that the big thing, again, is that it's not necessarily about trying to make everyone a coder or everyone a professional. It's about being able to have that conversation. And I think we're certainly seeing that. One of the phrases that really resonates and that I recall from our project is this idea of a T-shaped professional, something whereby what we need is lawyers, accountants, auditors, insurers that can speak to each other in a way that means that we can continue to add value. So I am going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much to my 4 guests and the speakers, and I'm going to hand over to Mel for the close. But thank you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. What a great start to the showcase session. And it always makes me reflect. I've really enjoyed this program because both as a funder and a consumer, it's always making me think about also my personal life. What does this mean to me? And do I really want to be investing in some of these technologies as well? So that brings us to lunch, which is probably the most exciting part of the day, at least in my diary, it always is. To those of you who are online watching, we're going to be keeping the link open, so do feel free to yourself stretch up or wherever you are, and we'll see you back hopefully online at 2 p.m. For those in the room, lunch is served across the way, which is also where the exhibits are and where you can meet some of the projects that have been funded from us. And I think we'll be calling you back just before 2 o'clock, back to the room, where you haven't heard the end of the Tim and Hillary, or the Hillary and Tim show, which is great because they're going to take us through a sample around business model innovation and what the insights from their project and that strand has been showing, and taking us through some living examples, I suppose, within that space. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you just before 2. feel terribly guilty when I have to interrupt people. Try to do it politely. But in this case, especially bad, as it's been about 2 years since we've had the buzz of conversations around us. So that's been really enjoyable to just see all the networking and listening to the quite challenging conversations that have been happening. So for you who are online with us, again, welcome back to the afternoon segment of our showcase event. I'm going to hand directly over to Professor Tim Vorley and to Hilary to take us through business model transformation. Their design-led thinking, which was part of one of the grants from the ESRC side on the business understanding and then the creating new knowledge around how to help business adopt the technology and how to diffuse it. This was one of the strands that they were working with and doing design-led sprints with the companies that they were partnering with. So without further ado, and if they're ready, I'll invite Tim and Hilary to the stage and take us through this session. Thank you.
See if it works. We're there, excellent. Oh, in orange, that's unusual. Right, so thank you for joining us after lunch. As Mel said, so I'm Tim Vorley. Hilary Smith-Allen is also going to help support this session, as is Carlo down at the front here. We're hoping that it's going to be a bit interactive. We're intending to tell you a bit about the project. If you haven't already got yourself one of these, they're available in the other room. We'll bring some in at the end as well. So this is the book output that we'll be talking about. If you've got a small bag or you don't wish to take the paper, you can find it on the memory stick as well, which has all the content for what we're going to talk to you about this afternoon. So in being funded by Innovate, UK and ESRC to do this work, what we've tried to create is a series of outputs that we are leaving as a legacy through the project. We've been working, as Mel said in her introduction, with a series of firms throughout the project. We've undertaken the research that really has informed what we're doing. While the project has finished formally, the kind of life of it, we're hoping will continue in different guises as well. So I'm going to talk through a bit about the project, like I say, and then hopefully in about 15 minutes, we'll kick in with a bit of the practical session for you guys as well. So there's three elements to the project. The project is kind of built around research. So it is a research-funded project. So the team, which comprised University of Lancaster, University of Manchester, University of the Arts London, Oxford Brookes, and two commercial partners, the Managing Partners Forum, and also Norman Partners, who are a futures and design organisation. We went into mid-tiers. We tried to understand specifically in the mid-tier sector what it is about those firms, why they are too big to fail but too small to invest and manage and implement AI effectively. And from that research, we then took on these other two parts of the project, so the design sprints and the futures. We're going to talk to you a bit about the futures workshop and the scenarios that we do. That's some of the paperwork that's on the table. But what we'll also do is we'll kind of talk you through some of the outcomes of the other work that we've been doing. So I guess one of the kind of key things, so as a professor in a business school, I probably knew nothing about AI when I started this. My interest is in business models, much like Chris, who was on the panel earlier, but also on organisational change. So we were really trying to understand through the research what it is within professional service firms, particularly legal and accounting, the barriers to the adoption and the transformation of AI, of which there are many. From that, we also work with stakeholders across the sector, so working with regulators, working with intermediaries to try and see how, I guess, we could actually accelerate that journey. And the title of the book, AI Readiness, I think when we kicked off the project, we thought, right, well, we'll ramp this up, we'll make this work, we'll do something to kind of really put some of the firms in the sector on the front foot. Whereas often when we walked into the firm, those that did want to participate, the question really was, what is AI and how can it help? So with that in mind, we kind of took a step back and we said, let's think about this AI readiness journey. Let's think about how we can get people on that journey, try and demystify it and try and make it a little less scary. So the way that we actually went about that was through design sprints. And I'll show you some pictures in a moment about what they look like. I can say that from my point of view, there's nothing more satisfying than watching a load of middle-aged white male lawyers junk modelling with Lego. And actually trying to get them not to think about the technology, but actually what the solution looks like, and actually trying to not just explain it, but actually to try and put something together physically that they then begin to explain. And that's kind of a key aspect of the design methodology which we decided to utilise as part of the project. The scenarios part, which Hilary's going to kind of lead us through later, was really about trying to challenge the future. I think one of the big things that came through in the research is that tomorrow looks much like today, apart from the fees have gone up a little bit. And we're also trying to kind of look forward in the calendar. So in terms of trying to challenge that future, what we did was we developed this series of scenarios. We developed them with the sector. It wasn't an academic exercise. And we used them then not to try and predict, but to provoke the businesses we were working with to think about how they might change and adapt. And obviously during the duration of the project, the pandemic struck. So everything that we were doing face-to-face moved online. And again, a scenario that we didn't predict, but one that many businesses have had to deal with in the interim. And I guess one of the other interesting things is during the pandemic, the use of technology has kind of gone through the roof. We've seen it become the new norm. But actually, it's the application of technology to old ways of working. And I think one of the things that we're acutely aware of is how do we get businesses to think more about what the future of tech holds and how they can use it for future challenges, as well as trying to address the current ones. So the other thing that I was going to say, there are these memory sticks that I've mentioned, so the sprint on a stick. The project reports, the project outputs are all on these. So if you're interested, the scenarios are written down, the test cases and some of the evidence from the work that we did looking at mid-tiers in accountancy and legal, some of the mapping work, trying to understand the challenges that it brings in terms of the regulators and the intermediaries. But all of these, again, please have a flick through at your leisure. We're going to focus on this one today, which is the design sprints. And again, the design sprints are something which are, like I say, there to provoke. They're presented in a way, both written and visual, which is intended to make those using them feel slightly uncomfortable. They ask questions that are normally outside of the remit of your average partner or managing partner and the teams that they manage. So it really is about trying to get people to think differently about the future. So I've mentioned mid-tiers a couple of times already. Mid-tiers with a turnover between 5 and 250 million, obviously a massively diverse cohort within that as well. As Seamus said, you're looking from just outside the top 10 right the way through to some of the smaller players. But we recognise that these firms could benefit massively from AI. But actually, it's almost like the VHS and Betamax challenge. Which one are you going to invest in? You don't want to end up with Betamax when we all go down the VHS route. They often don't have the budgets to be able to do this meaningfully. And therefore, they need to make informed decisions. But what has really happened is it's become a wait-and-see game. Many of the firms that we spoke to, they're looking at others in the sector, they're looking at the technology companies, but it's getting to that point where is it going to be too late when they do act? So I've mentioned again that Lucy Kimball, who was one of the collaborators on the project at the University of the Arts London, from a design background. And again, a design studio makes me slightly uncomfortable in terms of the mess that exists within it. You can only imagine what it does to the OCD of a lawyer. The reality, though, is that trying to use these methodologies to challenge and think about the way that they can think about the future was absolutely key. And it was trying to take them out of that normal kind of clear desk policy environment. So what we tried to do, we used the design principles to think about the experience. We think about how people interact, making visualizations, creating mock-ups and sharing ideas. Something that was absolutely kind of alien to those that we were doing it with. And I have to say, probably alien to half the research team at the beginning of the project as well. So something where not only were we trying to learn about the adoption and diffusion challenges of AI in the services through the research, but when we then started undertaking this as action research, we as academics were all kind of learning as well, and the partners that we had on the professional side as well. So there was a lot of prototyping, there was a lot of co-design, and again, this isn't about having workable AI solutions, but what it is, it's about trying to think about what these things actually look and feel like. And for me, that's so important, and actually it's that moment of realization when you're working with professionals in the context of their firm. You've got toilet rolls, plastic, cereal boxes, Lego all over the desk, and what they're trying to explain to you is the outcome that they want from the AI. And I think that for me, that was a kind of a real eye-opening point at which we then started to say, we can iterate this, we can develop this. And since, as Mel said at the beginning, we've conducted 40 of these design sprints. Some of them have been with firms on an individual basis where they're bringing between kind of 10 and 25 people in for the day, which is a huge investment on the basis of the firm. Some of them have been smaller, where we've been hosting multi-firm sprints, where firms are bringing between 3 and 5 people along, and they're working in their groups using the same methodology in parallel, but independently. Because the other thing is that many of these firms, the first time we had the multi-firm sprint, they're all looking at each other thinking we probably shouldn't be in the same room together, talking about the same challenges, acknowledging we don't know enough about this. there was a degree of comfort given that there were multiple firms there and they weren't the only one, but actually it meant that the idea sharing wasn't as strong as it is in a single firm sprint. But the key thing is, it was about embracing with uncertainty. And that uncertainty, I think, is something that, again, the conversations this morning, the panel, the keynote earlier, there are many aspects of this that are unknown. So the way the sprint works, and you've got copies of this on your table, so please don't strain your eyes on my account, but it kind of falls into 4 main phases. And they are, first of all, this kind of broad examination, trying to get firms to think about the business model. The first thing that we discovered was that actually many of those that were in the room understood the business model differently. And I think by getting people onto the same page allows you to have a more constructive conversation about what that means for trying to develop and implement AI-type solutions. So the next point around explore. Actually, what is AI? How can we use it? What potential does it bring to the business? Chris spoke earlier quite eloquently about the efficiencies it can bring. In some contexts, it isn't disruptive. In other contexts, it is. And it's really about trying to think about how that works at the firm level. So phase 3, this is where it was very much the hands-on, the develop, trying to get firms to think about, put the kind of the sticky tape, the toilet rolls, the cereal boxes into place using kind of pasta and string to explain what they're trying to understand. Now, it sounds like it's a million miles from AI, and I'd be lying if I said it was. But actually, the thing that it does is allow you to kind of really tangibly think about what you're trying to do. We can all sit there and kind of hypothesize about what AI can do, how it's going to work, what we want to achieve. But as soon as you start making it physical, it really does kind of turn the screw that bit further, because you begin to be able to debate with others more meaningfully about what you're trying to achieve, why it would work and why it wouldn't. The fourth part was really about the reflection. And the key thing there was about the sharing ideas. Thinking about in legal firms where you've got different groups, different teams, where you've got different structures, thinking about in accountancy firms and audit firms, where you've got different groups and practice areas coming together, they don't talk. And I think the key thing about the sprint was trying to get people from those different areas to have a common conversation. And so the sprint was a way of convening that. So with lots of reflection, lots of feedback, it takes you right back to the start. Now, we got to the point where the aim for us was actually to leave the firm with a write-up of their journey, and it allows them to move into the next stage where they might be thinking about what they want to buy, what they want to commission. Because while there are a hell of a lot of off-the-shelf projects and processes and products out there, very few are relevant exactly to the solution that the firm wants. So it helps them try and be a more informed consumer in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So all of this culminates in the book. I've waved it once, I'll wave it again. It's a kind of an A to Z really on how to run the sprint. All of the materials are open access. It's very much about trying to help firms to help themselves. And given the project is at an end, we are now running out of time and resource to be able to go into firms to do this. It was kindly supported by UKRI, which allowed us to do the sprints that we've done. Some of these are now being provided on a cost basis where we're going into firms. Others are asking us and emailing us about the materials, how they can use them, and look to try and self-facilitate. So the book is really about that self-facilitation. So I'm not here trying to sell it, is what I'm trying to say. But if you want to give me some money, come and see me afterwards. The ways that we've done this, if you want one of the delegate bags, if you grab them on the way out, they've got a copy of the book in, they've got a copy of the business model innovation cards. So again, when Chris was talking about business models and business model innovation area earlier, the solid cards along the top row, they're core business model questions. They ask you about the product, the service. They ask you about the configuration. They ask you about your customer experience. One of the key things for me about AI in law firms and accountancy firms is that innovation is not just about tech. It's about trying to innovate in other areas of the business. So what we've tried to do is have a series of kind of gamified questions that absolutely kind of challenge and provoke within the firm to think, well, what are you going to do next? How's it going to work? Arrays of these cards keep coming up. So the more sprints we've done, the more firms we've worked with, we can look at permutations of the cards, trying to understand the way in which we can try and add value in thinking about how we can support firms with that kind of co-design process. And the great thing is that none of these have answers. The answer is relevant to the firm. And I think that the firm needs to develop the answer, and hence why the sprint is a much more facilitated process. So in terms of what we do on the sprints, lots of templates, lots of filling things in, trying to storyboard and use different methodologies. We found out very early on that there's very few good artists in legal and accounting firms, so we started to try and provide templates and examples that they can use. I mentioned already, halfway through the pandemic, we had to switch to doing this online. So the image there on the right-hand side is one of an online sprint where we were trying to facilitate this remotely as well. So we've kind of got both sides of it down to a fine art, much more fun in person, plus the fact you get a lunch and some coffee. The reality is, though, that both had good outcomes, and it's about trying to get people through that early stage of the journey. Trying to kind of, again, collaborate across different areas of the business. I've mentioned the importance of this already. It is absolutely intriguing how you can have the members of the C-suite in any organisation articulate the business model differently. And so when you go back to your organisations, and whether that is a university, whether it's a professional services firm, consultancy or otherwise, ask yourself, does the person sitting across the room or in the next office, do they understand the business model the way that I do? Because our evidence from this research would suggest that they don't. And I think that trying to get people onto the same page, absolutely key if you're going to innovate and if you're going to find new ways of creating value. And I don't mean creating value as if in making your firm more profitable, but that's something that's always top of the agenda, particularly when you're talking to lawyers in an LLP. But the other thing that it's about trying to create value for your clients. And I think that's where the kind of the missing hook was, that people didn't understand where they were trying to create value and who they were trying to create value for. So I wasn't lying, plastics, pasta, kind of junk. It's all about trying to articulate. And here you've got the idea of a hub, trying to be more connected, engaging with different parts of the globe. And actually, when you then try and say, so what's the AI going to be able to help with in this? It quickly demystifies some of the things, well, AI is never going to do that. That's not going to happen. Or actually, that's a CRM system. The fact that you don't know your organization's already got that is probably problematic. So it's trying to think through this in different ways. It's trying to kind of challenge, again, provoke, but get people to think about where the problems are in their business, in the workflow of their business. So the kind of whole operations idea and what that brings, and the research part of our team that were into the operations management side of it, looking at where there were issues, challenges and opportunities that could be made more efficient or overcome through some of the AI technologies. So at this point in time, I'm going to hand over to Hilary, who's going to talk us through. So Hilary, myself and Carlo will kind of float around the room when she's kind of given a bit more context. But thank you for listening. Do pick up a copy of the book. This one's spoken for. But otherwise, yeah, any questions, do grab us afterwards.
Are you coming back? Okay, brace yourselves. This is the doing bit. It did say workshop on the agenda. You have been warned. Please don't make us have that awkward moment where nobody says anything when we start asking questions. That's the warning. But we wanted, when thinking about this, was just a large group. We normally work in smaller groups, but we really wanted to give you a sense of some of the actual tools and the way that firms were using it. So we haven't come with egg boxes and sellotape, but we are going to just try and give you a little bit of a mini insight and experience into the scenarios workshop, which was a standalone item. We can run it with a firm specifically looking at their technology roadmap and how that works and wind tunneling it, or we could do it within the design sprint as part of that immersive experience, taking them through the thinking about technology leading to the dunk modelling. But why and the future and they're all on click. I'm just going to go click, click, click. As Tim mentioned at the beginning, we had a dedicated consultancy called Norman Partners who were part of the interdisciplinary team working with us, and they sell this stuff as a service for more than any of us are paid, and clearly I should be going and doing that and making a career out of it. But this is not a new technique. It's something that the likes of Shell, thinking about different scenarios, because the future is not one. But if we sit here today, there are many different versions of the future that could manifest. And yet what we found, particularly in professional services firms, it's not that they don't have that debate. It's not when you think about the business plan. It's not that they're not thinking about what might happen in the future. It's just the nature, particularly partnerships, because it's consensus-led management. That's how decisions get done. It's consensus. Is that you have that sort of all that uncertainty and the what-ifs and the what-ifs. And then one version of the future kind of comes out of that, which is the commonly agreed, accepted, least controversial, park that, and then the business plan and the strategy gets fitted in and designed for that. And it's always a hockey stick, right? It'll be better next year. That's a whole different story. But scenarios as a technique and this future thinking is recognizing that they're not predictive, but they start to have factors and themes and things which are intrinsically linked to the decisions that you're making. It draws out the assumptions and says, well, what if not that? What about that? And then actually, would our business still survive? Or would this particular way of this service still exist? And you can compartmentalize it. You start to see. So that's what we wanted to explore. They're typically realized in different medium. College, University of Arts, that's the way it was led from there. We had posters done for us, but you can go on YouTube. You can certainly find Shell's thinking about the future of energy and oil in that context. And they've got some videos and animations, and you can find many others. And it's a whole sequence of events. So there are some factors and things which are in the scenarios that, you know, well, hang on a minute, that's not completely and utterly directly relevant to my law firm or my accountancy firm, a mid-tier at this point in time. But it's a part of that, it's a systemic view. So it might be a factor of that. But if the world goes that way, or the UK or technology, then these things all cumulatively add up to a different type of world. And then your business would be trying to be profitable and survive within that. And there's more than one. So we've shared with you on the tables, or I'll come back to that in a moment, that's just one of the synopsis versions. We have the posters, and I'll show you those in a moment. But then within the book, Wave Book, he's listening, beeping it, right? Wave Book. But within that, you'll find some other medium to really try and bring that immersive experience. There's like a story from a retired professional looking back the decade of what it was like running the firm for the last years, but written from the point of 2040. And it's all to create that immersive experience. Yeah, I've done that. So we have a separate book that can be downloaded. That's on the Whizzy Stick. Yes, get a Whizzy Stick. And then we also got it within the overall toolkit as part of the sprint. And so this is one of our 3 scenarios, platform domination. And this, as it says here, I don't know why everything's gone orange. A world where it says a few platform businesses control access to data infrastructure, setting the rules for everyone else, including the need to access to data to train algorithms or automate services. This was an extension of many different stakeholders came together to think about this, from all regulatory, from policy, from the firms, from different size firms, from tech companies. And it's that sort of fear of what if it was like the networks, like mobile phones, and somebody owned either the data or the infrastructure, and you couldn't play if you can't plug in. And that's very real. When we talk about the top end, and we heard Seamus talking about it earlier, about the big 4 becoming potentially the big 3, one of the big 3, and they all own that, then what does that mean for the competition in the markets of professional services, and particularly the mid-tiers that we were thinking about? So that's one world, and that's part of your pack on the table we're going to explore. Super bumpy highway. This is people surrounded by ever-updating personalised surveillance, digital base, underpinned by invisible, minimally regulated, automated. This one was really starting to tap into that idea of competition, but from outside of the sector. And we found this a lot through the research, thinking about accounting and legal or who's competing. And they're very, very focused on like being number 7 or 6. I'd love to know who number 7 was from this morning. But they're very aware within the sector themselves. But Facebook, if you're a lawyer and you're in probates and wills, it knows all of your family connections. It has so many users, more than you're ever going to have in terms of clients. And there's only one tweak to regulation which says actually they could turn that on and do all the wills and things through that. So actually, could it be exogenous to the sector? And that's what this scenario particularly explores. And what if it didn't come from the West? What if it came from Asia and the likes of Tencent, who in WeChat, that sells insurance just through the chat platform? Well, that was a bit head spinny, so it's a little challenging, this one. It tends to be the one that creates the most pessimism, but you're not allowed to like. You're meant to have an emotional response, but you're not allowed to have a favourite and a preferred, because they're not predictive, remember. And then the last one, actually, over the life of the project, this one I think has really started to come out a little bit more, particularly with COVID, but was quite, one that people went, had the most emotional response to start with, was value kaleidoscope. So it was less about economic, capitalist type measures and the environment and sustainability and green economy and the users of the future choosing service providers based on these types of values, and that therefore causing a shift in the way that businesses and services are done. So a very, very different world. and this is what you have on the table. You have 2 of them, and this is what we're going to be using. But they're summaries. And the way that we've been using these in the workshops with particular firms when we do it is you start with one. I suggest you read the coloured box in the middle. That's that scenario. That's that summary that we've had on the previous slides. There's a little bit more description down the bottom. But the commonality is about these headings. So on the societal acceptance of AI, you can take from that one and across to the next one. And that's consistent across the 3. And that's how then you start to draw out the comparators about these different worlds. And the way that we use them with the workshops is that we're going to have a light touch version of this. And we're going to ask you in a minute to read a poster. You can pick one or you can try doing it with both, depending. And we do ask you to work with, maybe talk to the people next to you. I know you've all been talking out there, but let's talk in here too. And we're going to put 3 questions up there. We're going to take one at a turn, and then there'll be a roaming mic, and we'll come and ask you. But we want you to think about that question in the context of one or both of the worlds. So discuss what's going on and be ready to share a key insight. So question number 1. We have a few minutes. What aspects of legal and accounting firms in the UK would mean that they would be successful in this world? Now, if this was a firm, we've done it at a very holistic level. What about your business model? What about the services that you do? Which ones would survive? And that's how you do it. But you're trying to get a sense of how we do that now. So if we can all, this is the awkward bit. I'm going to go off the stage. I'm going to get a roaming mic. So just have a read through, see how they make you feel. Initially, just do you think hopefully it's plausible but not too far-fetched, but it is going to be challenging. And we're keen to hear as much about which things do you think really resonate and which ones don't from a particular world, but in the context of what would make it more successful for UK legal and accounting. That's right. Carlo, Tim, let's go in. Come on, I mean it, we're doing something. I know, awkward silence. Reading, that's it. How's it going? No? You don't agree with it? Shake your head. Breastbones, what's breastbones? Oh, we're happy to talk to him after this. How's it going? No, just pick a world. In this world, pick one. We have our first volunteer for sharing an insight. Go on, but what's it? So say hello, introduce yourself.
Hi all, my name is Hutton Henry, and we're on Team What? What team is our team? Team Academic. I'd like to say, so we're looking at this first scenario and noticing, well, first of all, we're thinking that if you only had 3 big players, they probably have gobbled up the mid-size in some way. So then there's the human capital piece. But what we found quite interesting in those markets really was this social acceptance of AI, but AI being hidden and not very transparent. So that's really the main thing we're discussing at the moment. Okay.
So if you're a mid-tier, you're selling up. Yep. Or merging. Yep. Okay, you heard it here. If you're happy with that, yes, Claire. Thank you, Claire.
I'll put another perspective to it. So it'll be services that could be automated through data. So it'll be anything that is data-driven will be a commodity buy on a platform. Yeah, and then there'll be the niche services that don't fit that, will set off a load of niche smaller businesses doing direct. So you could diversify the marketplace. And I don't think the platform players would do the niche work because they wouldn't be geared to do the personal bit.
So we've heard this one a little bit before, just in terms of maybe the human contact becomes like the Louis Vuitton end of the services market, that it becomes much more segmented. Ooh, anyone else want to share an insight or a reaction to one of the scenarios, thinking about this first question? Okay, then we'll move on to question 2. Oh, was there one there? Yes, thank you. Introduce yourself and say hi.
Hi, I'm Cristiano. Maybe with respect to the first scenario, I was thinking if I were a lawyer firm or an insurance firm, I would think about partnering up with one of the providers, so at least I start having a saying, and then I have even a larger, actually I can drive the market of that particular, the way the algorithms and the offerings work. So that's it.
So if you can't beat them, join them. That was actually one of the things we saw through a couple of the workshops we ran, where you could see the minds opening up from the partners, because they were very self-serving. We do this, we know, we must build, we can only do proprietary software. But actually one of the outcomes from that was that they actually went, maybe we do need to think partners-wise. Okay, so thinking then moving on to the next question, which ones would absolutely not be successful? Oh, you can go for number 1, we can keep going. Thanks, Stephen.
Yes, Stephen Brown. One of the areas that I thought could be successful out of this, especially from an insurance perspective or from a legal perspective, would be almost being the direct line of the go compare world. So law firms saying, or insurance companies going, if you want a service where people do this rather than AI, rather than a rules-based system where a person has to fit into a subset of process, then we will bring the personal back, but there's a premium in insurance for that.
Yeah, it's like a tiered pricing, if that's what. Yeah, and again, something we like to challenge on. Well, you do one thing one way, and what about your freemium version? This, how do you have different levels of service? And that is, that's the equivalent of swearing in a law firm. When you suggest it, but it's a good one. What about anything that would not be successful? I'm going to give you a few more minutes, then I'll turn this thing back on, just to think about the next question. Anything that would absolutely not be successful? We've got a volunteer.
Roger Moore from the University of Exeter. Right, so one thing that I don't think will be successful is matching volume and variety. So I think the really big challenge will be if you think you're going to do lots of volume and at the same time think you're going to do lots of variety. That will cost you a fortune. Very hard to do in a service context, mass personalisation. Very hard to do.
Was it one or other of the worlds that you were thinking about when you said that, or are you applying to both? Platform domination. Thank you. Any responses to that comment? I wonder. Oh, back to Glenn.
So mass personalisation is getting much easier again as we're getting more data and everything becomes interactive. So if you drive an electric car, you're going to have insurance through that because it'll know what you're doing. And the more we do health, we're talking about IoT devices on your health, on your body, you're going to get health insurance. And okay, that's insurance. What about, okay, we're talking legal and accountancy, so that is harder. But again, with open banking, I suppose, and accounts are accounts, it's the same for everybody. It's only regulation that makes you have to get independent, and if it becomes more trustworthy and open, maybe. I don't know, I'm bullshitting now.
We're not allowed to swear on the mic. I was given the rules, Glenn. Oh, we're going back over here. Loving it.
I think one area that won't be successful is contentious areas of law that involves emotion. Because if you get in a divorce, the law can say one thing and try not to swear, but you might want to say to the other person, I don't care, just stick it to them. I don't care on the cost. And there's lots of emotion that can get brought up in both accounting and legal work types.
Yes, that idea of, well, it's not always legal advice that's given through the law, and that there's many other drivers in terms of the decisions and the contracts that are enacted, and particularly within a personal and the professional world. It's sometimes easier to think about this stuff in a business context, isn't it, than when you're dealing with the B2C. Oh, you said you were going to keep the mic, so I didn't ask you.
So interesting argument that it's when emotion comes in that you don't need it. Is there not also an argument that in those situations, trying to remove the emotion can actually get you to the result quicker?
Did anyone ever see that robot? You reminded me of the robot marriage consultant. Well, that's worth finding on Channel 4, apparently, because he had absolutely zero emotion. And then when it had gone on and had found affairs in this marriage counselling, and the father was trying to match the daughter up in an Asian wedding scenario, and she was unhappy about it, but the robot just went for it because it said the things that weren't being said, and actually they felt like resolution came. So yeah, it's an interesting programme. So I'm just moving on to the last question very, very quickly then. If the scenario was going to unfold, what might the firms, we have one suggestion of partnering, but what might the firms that are operating and employing people here need in terms of those capabilities or other resources to be successful? So that's your last 2 minutes on that one. But then in tech terms, there's a massive funding, isn't there? And that seems to be on. We've got more niche there, so it's really good. Yeah. Cyclical. All right, lots of talk. Any volunteers to have a comment on the last question before I hand back to Tim? Oh, I'm going to have to pick. Who else at the table hasn't said anything? This table hasn't said anything. You had an idea?
Well, I'm sort of, I think I'm just wishing the first scenario isn't the scenario because I'm from neither. I just sound like it. Yeah, it just reminded me very much of broadband in the UK, where Openreach controls the network infrastructure, and that's been kind of nationalised. So I think the sort of smaller companies that could embrace some kind of lobbying to democratise access to that monopolised data.
So actually a role for a different kind of regulation within the sector. Any other closing comments? Anyone else on the last question? Oh, okay.
Do you want me to say something? I was glad I was sitting next to Stephen because he's got so many insights. But we were just looking at, computer says no examples. We obviously had the emotion one, but I'm speaking for Stephen really here, but where examples where you might have strategic losses or things that don't make any sense. How do you explain that? How do you get around that? So understanding that, I suppose. But I think really the skills are going to be perhaps easier for people to get because they're going to be the same. And one thought I had was the way that Apple Store has raised the ethical and quality of apps. Does that platform, dominating platform, have a positive impact that actually makes learning and skill development easier and more consistent and perhaps with benefits like ethics? Don't know.
Definitely an alternative view. I like that one. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Tim then, just to close the session. But hopefully that's given you a little insight, a little bit of a practical, light touch example of some of the tools that are available in the book. Back to Tim.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for playing along. It is obviously a lot easier when people speak. The whole point of this is to be interactive, to provoke, and I guess kind of, as I say, the project is coming to an end. The website, which you can get on one of our free coffee cups if you so wish, is nextgenpsf.co.uk. You can also look at the AI readiness link. All of the book, the tools and everything are absolutely available to download on that. If you want more information, any of those emails come through to Hilary, Carlo and myself. We have had and we will continue to have a number of kind of multi-firm sprints. You can obviously do your own thing out of the book. And if you do it, we'd love to hear how you get on and what that looks like. And if there's any more information that you are after, obviously the leaflets that are on the table kind of summarise it. The book in kind of, on occasion, excruciating detail provides lots of information about what you can do and how you can go about it. They are available here. They're free of charge. Grab them all you can. And if you think that there's someone who's not here that might want one, then please take a couple, share them around. And I hope you've enjoyed the session. So thanks for playing along. I'm going to hand over to Mel.
I have to confess, one of the best sessions to have after lunch. Usually you get the lull period, but actually brought all the energy back into the room. So thank you very much, Tim and Hilary. We're coming up to our next panel, which is looking at the next horizon around professional business service. And Phil Godstuff is going to come up and introduce the panel. He's also been kind of involved with us on this journey for quite a long time. Phil is from the University of Exeter. And Stephen and I were remembering when we were meeting in 2017 at a meeting room in London and discussing what were the potentials for this program and where could we be. And Phil was involved in those and then subsequently became involved in our advisory group. So I think Phil, it's fair to say, has also been on this journey with us. So it's great pleasure that I invite him up to the stage to chair this next panel. Immediately after that, Stephen Browning will then come up and he'll give us the closing remarks, but also be launching our report of AI for Services 2022. So we'll be passing on from that right into Stephen, and then, of course, ending with a tiny bit of a reception, which, to those of you online, we hope that you can enjoy us in the virtual world in that space. So, Phil.
Do we have a slide? Yes. Oh, brilliant. Oh, all ready to go, chaps? Afternoon, everybody. Fascinating stuff. The thing that I'll add that Mel didn't is that I also was involved in a collaborative research and development project with a small SME doing law tech. That in itself was a fascinating experience of learning on both sides, especially when they pivoted from not being in law tech anymore. Anyway, let me introduce the panel. Samaray is a senior lecturer in innovation and management at Oxford Brookes University, has been working on the Tech NGI project based out of Loughborough. She previously worked for the Australian government funded research institute, NICTA. Her area of expertise is the economic impact of innovation and digital transformation, in particular, the use of incubators and accelerators and technological ecosystems to foster economic growth. She has previously worked in the Israeli high-tech sector. On the far left, we have Anthony Peake, the founder and CEO of Intelligent AI, a highly experienced managing director, strategist, innovator, and large deal maker. I was chatting to him before we came in, and we have a common experience in understanding business processes and the work that people are doing. He's worked across many industries with 30 years proven experience in building companies, products, and working in innovation. A passion for delivering strategic vision, harking back to the previous workshop, exceptional results and a relaxed, down-to-earth style. Lastly, Alex, managing partner at Ethic Lab and CEO of Kuva. He runs Ethic Lab, which is a research and design consultancy operating at the forefront of the digital technologies that are transforming our culture, our politics, and our daily lives. So what I found fascinating this morning is the ability and the chance to share stories of what we've been through. And we build understanding, we build networks through sharing these stories. So before we get on to, if you like, the next horizon, I'd like to invite each of the panelists to reflect a little on what went well in the work that they did with the Next Generation Services, what were the barriers they faced, and how they overcame those barriers. So if I can start with you, please, Samaray.
So when we started the project 3 years ago, we were given that funding, generous funding, to research this AI moment in insurance and general Next Generation Services funding. So we were thinking about data as an input. So if we build on secondary data or we collect our data, develop our output, our tools and framework, once we are ready with our framework and outputs and publications, the industry moved forward already. So here we are, 3 years later. We need to provide something that would last for many years to come. So our solution for that was to use actually data companies that scrape the web, companies like Dealroom and Crunchbase, whoever is familiar with those, and to use those data footprint of those companies that work in insurance and in general professional services to feed into our methodology. And we were using social network analytics, using this data, and we created this kind of knowledge space. So the knowledge space is something that will be able to show how the coalescence of categories of knowledge within the insurance industry and more generally the professional services. So the barrier for us was data, and we got over that stage keeping on track with the dynamic of different behavior of development of technology within the industry.
Okay, thank you. Anthony.
It was interesting. We part of the No Risk Consortium, so we brought together the sort of insurance, the legal, the financial, and we started off from a innovation lab. I was saying to Stephen before, you know, business people in a room, they've all got their ball. My ball's the best one. Everyone come and look at my ball. And trying to get business people to sort of correlate together and to form a consortium to put in a bid. I was very skeptical, but actually we got together with Sweetbridge, we got together with Engine B, SciStella, Digital Catapult, etc. I think we all decided that each other had a slightly better ball. And it actually gave us a drive to create something. So Intelligent AI, we've been focused very much on insurance risk, Sweetbridge on supply chain risk, Engine B and others on Engine B on the audit risk. And actually, when we bring that together, we're looking at risk generally. It was a coincidence and a very good one that actually we've looked at a knowledge graph of everything to do with commercial property insurance risk. Sweetbridge are very much around the sort of knowledge graph of supply chain and computable contracts, Engine B around the audit risk. And once you can then define your data in that sort of hierarchy, you can then share data across them. So it was very successful through the project. We started right at the beginning of the pandemic. We were very fortunate that Innovate UK had the continuity grants, so that we didn't have to find all the matching of ourselves. And as a purely sort of commercial organisation, the moment markets slow down, it's hard to find matching funding. Innovate UK seemed to have pre-guessed what our needs were and helped with the matching, which actually then helped form companies. It helped to employ people at a time when you probably wouldn't have employed people. And so actually, I think we've had very successful projects. But ultimately, I think the summary of that would be, I don't think we'd be where we were if we didn't collaborate right at the beginning. If it wasn't a consortium, these things would have fallen apart possibly.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
We were asked to look at the feasibility of applying data technologies to the affordable justice sector. And just as is common with our practice, we wanted to begin by examining how it works as a system. And I think the biggest challenge we found was that once we got on the ground and spoke to our consortium partners and their wider network, we were forced to conclude that it didn't really have the capacity to act as a system or as a sector. That's not necessarily a criticism of them themselves, but the idea that they had some structure for medium and long-term planning, or that technologies could be built to address particular problems or sets of problems that came to the front, it would have been folly to pursue that line. So we ended up spending the second half of our project trying to design technologies that would be affordance structures for that to emerge. We wanted to support the potential existence of collaborations and collaborators. And we ended up identifying a suite of technologies which we thought would have a systemic impact on the sector. And quite fortunately, and certainly to agree with my colleague here, with the support of Innovate UK, we were able to spin out more than one company that was able to take advantage of that. But I suppose naively, that wasn't something we expected to encounter. And obviously, first contact with anybody, we lost that sense of coordination.
Yes. Anthony, you mentioned collaboration. And coming to you first on that one. How do you think we can build on the networks and the collaborations that we've got so far?
I think it's been a really nice mix of sort of academia in projects, research organisations, together with commercial, together with governmental agencies. So, for instance, we were fortunate in having Digital Catapult. Lots of us are doing bits of AI. As commercial organisations with certain psychometric profiles, you try to take a shortcut or two naturally for commercial pressures or wherever. But actually, working within a framework, ethical AI, starting at the beginning of the collaboration with actually having, working towards an ethical framework where you didn't want anything to be a black box, as mentioned earlier on, where you want to be able to audit the source of the data. That collaboration with the support of governmental and research organisations to be able to deep dive a lot better has worked really well. We're fortunate in No Risk, where there were partners in many other countries, and some of them were intending to come to the UK. Systel are one of our partners out in Sweden. They were intending to come to the UK and then couldn't, but with Zoom and other tools, we've been able to have a truly global project. So I think it also helps in really getting that product market fit, in exploring how well your product delivers benefits. Actually, a more rounded product, just insurance or just supply chain, actually where you're dealing with the edge cases between those, I actually think it creates a more competitive product. a differentiated product and probably a richer product.
Okay. So, yes, go on.
So in terms of collaboration, in terms of research, development or evolution, so we've been investigating that in, a digital transformation insurance over the last few years. And in the beginning, we saw this need from startup to collaborate with incumbents or different stakeholders, it could be underwriters, insurance brokers, etc., for data to get their insights of the deep understanding of the soft knowledge about insurance, and this kind of collaboration we see. At the end of the project, towards the end of the project, we've seen more startups and scale-up collaboration, so they less need those incumbents to provide a different and new business proposition. So you can see those large companies or those that have been through an IPO, they have some money in their pockets, they are able to increase or diversify the business proposition. Another thing about collaboration within the insurance industry and more generally the professional services, we are talking here in this panel about the future, about the horizon. In terms of policy design, if we look ahead, there are some collaboration that we see today, but in the future we would not be able to forecast. For example, if we, through our knowledge space methodology that we developed, we are able to map that kind of clusters of knowledge that you not think about them intuitively. So, for example, if you get some companies working in banking, the intuition would say, yeah, that's the next stage to move to insurance because their absorptive capacity is growing over time. So that they are ready to absorb that knowledge. But, you wouldn't make probably the link between gaming and insurance, but maybe that is the direction. So these kind of tools we are able to develop and show for further research potential and where the future it might go.
Okay. How do you think academic collaboration will work going forward? We always find it hard to get published in journals and disciplines that we're not core in. So have you found difficulties there, and how have you overcome them?
That's a good question, because we as a team, we led our work package within that Tech and GI project. We are a multidisciplinary team. We got data analytics, I'm an economist, we got a geographer, and the other people in our team were from different universities, from management and innovation, etc. I think it's very... It creates positive impact because we challenge each other and we provide different terminology for things that we come from our historical research and studies. It is a challenge. I wouldn't say it is not. Even if we want to aim for a specific publication, there is some tension within the team where we're aiming etc. But I think the outcome is really significant. We recently been able to publish in a 3-star journal. I think because of that tension, because we do not accept something that is quite clear for everyone, it's kind of stimulating conversation.
Yes, I mean, part of the point of that question being knowledge isn't knowledge till it's written down if you're an academic and it's got published. So if you're finding it difficult to get published in things, you will tend to drift away from doing that sort of work, which is a shame because we're talking about collaboration and networks, and that's really how it ought to work in academia. I'm looking at you now. Alex, collaboration networks going forwards.
I think from experience, I've encountered a significant set of assumptions about the ways information and power are flowing through networks that are being subject to these technologies. And especially with respect to institutions and individuals. And I don't see any reason why that has to pertain. I think it's a cultural assumption about how we act now. So I wouldn't want to make a prediction, but I suspect that might not last as such a strong effect going forward. Certainly, again, with respect to the way that people were interacting with the charitable institutions we worked with, that was already breaking down.
Okay, so, all right, so there's a horizon in the title. So horizons are things that you can see but never quite get to and certainly can't touch. So if we think about the future professional services, say, of the next 10 years, we started to work on that in the previous session. what do you think professional services will look like in, say, 7.5 years' time? So if we start again with Anthony.
There was a joke I put on LinkedIn, which was if you unfroze an underwriter from 100 years ago, it will probably take them 24 hours to get back up to speed again with the way the industry works. 7 years is probably a very short blink. No, in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, the big challenge I see today in the insurance space I'm in is that everything is annual and manual. They get all the premiums in at the beginning of the year and they make a lot in treasury, and if they lose in certain areas, then that's not too bad. Now, with global warming and other things hitting, they are beginning to look at efficiencies. They're beginning to look at the quality of the data. They have woken up to the fact that they're spending 80% of their time looking for data and doing internal admin, and they've got less than 20% of their time to help clients mitigate risk. You know, I particularly started intelligent AI after Grenfell Tower, and there is plenty of data out there to predict that doors weren't fitted correctly, that materials in cladding isn't right, that the fire service has called out to a building more often and no insurer was looking at that. So actually, to me, it's about moving from a manual and annual industry into more real time. It's not a matter of me taking all of the risk. It's a matter of me computing contracts and transferring some of that back. So with IoT, for instance, if your sprinkler system isn't working, I can see a green light once a month, almost like a teenager's telematics in their car, and I can tell whether you're managing that building correctly. And if you're not, I can transfer some of that risk back. At a certain point, that becomes too painful for you, the commercial property owner, and you go and fix the thing. So actually, I think real-time data will drive risk mitigation, it'll drive changes, it'll help society, and actually it'll make the insurance more profitable. So to me, it is just, as with many digital transformations in many industries, it becomes microtransactions.
Okay, I think picking up on your point about underwriters, the observation I heard was that insurance was invented 400 years ago and hasn't moved on since. Professional service, what's out there in the next 10 years?
So I'll give two predictions. 20 years from now, there won't be any insurance. We were able to proxy risk to that extent. We had that conversation with people from the radar, maybe. We are here in the audience. So we will be able to proxy risk with all the data, linking to your data wealthiness. We will able to have so many data points to structure our understanding of a phenomenon of a risk. So we wouldn't. People in individual businesses would not need insurance, so that's 20 years maybe. 10 years vision, I would think that the industry will flip because it is growing into more and more customer-centric industry, customized services, understanding risk in particular for specific characteristics, whether it's an individual, an organization, etc., or a situation. So the thing is that when the customer is in the heart of the industry, it might flip where the consumers or the customers would claim for the value of their data. So now we are talking about service provider owning the data. The data intellectual property is actually something that the service provider owns, whether it's the big tech or whether the incumbents or any service provider, even the new tech companies that come into the market, for example, Lemonade. So the thing is that as an individual, as customers, you're unable to get the value. In economics, you would call it a social externality, that you don't provide any cost to it. So maybe in the future that balance will change and people will get some share of their value of their data.
So it becomes a much more two-way flow of value between supplier and customer.
Yeah, so now that there is some value that the consumers will get, they get a lower premium, it's more inclusive to include young drivers that don't have a historical data about the driving, etc. That is true, but that is the current situation. But in the future, people will start to understand there is value for their data.
Okay, so two-way flows of value, microtransactions. Alex.
I completely agree. I don't see a set of professional practices that are accountancy or insurance will last. I don't know about the timescale, but I think I agree. And where there will be an industry, I think it will be in owning and disposing of what goes on within the technologies and within the building that takes place.
Picking up on that, large data-driven organisations have tended in the past not to get into regulated industries. I'm thinking of Amazon and Facebook. Do you just see potentially one financial services provider?
Wider, did you say?
So just one. Would there be just one financial services provider, or is there still an option for a range of providers?
To me, I can see it sort of evolving so it doesn't quite look the same. It's the who provides the insurance on an automated car, a self-driving car. Does that become the car manufacturer? Does that become the insurer? Is it one via the other, but in a slightly different model? So it doesn't look like a bricks and mortar insurer. It doesn't look like a bricks and mortar financial service organisations. They may end up using the knowledge that they have about all the data they've always had that's fragmented. Eventually they may unfragment it, join it together and actually become a knowledge business as opposed to a financial service business. Those who have bricks and mortar and selling cars and building buildings, etc., may end up doing the insurance of the thing that they sell you. So I think there'll be a merge between them. It'll look different.
One of the things we found in our research when we, looked at 40,000 startups and scale-up is actually we were asked to map the insurance industry, but actually we ended up in understanding that we don't really understand the boundary of this industry because there is a digital transformation where tech companies, offer insurance and car manufacturer offer insurance and insurance company collaborating with other companies and startups or different service providers collaborating with insurers. So the boundary of what is insurance is not clear, really.
Did you resolve it?
We just presented this as a finding. There is no solution for that. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to offer it up now, please, to questions to the floor or observations. If you have a story to tell, happy to take that as well. So, any questions? Again, like Tim, I haven't seeded anybody, but I might just pick somebody. Any thoughts on the future?
It's like in class, students don't like to ask questions.
I'm curious, you said that...
I should open an online poll.
You said there'd be no insurance companies potentially in the future. I'd like to understand who would pay for it then, because that sounds fantastic.
So once you are an organization, you would understand your probability for a risk or something that you want to insure. You might decide about this to incorporate this probability. But if you find that you have a 0.0001 probability chance for that incident to happen, or flood or whatever dynamic issue that happen, you probably would not want to insure yourself. So once you as an individual being able to assess and understand the risk to the finest granularity for you specifically, you might not choose to insure yourself. And again, it puts the consumer in the center, and it is going there anyway. But that's the question: whether the value and the ownership will get into the consumer.
Thank you.
I think potentially how we consume things will determine the insurance model, etc. So if I put this into a context that's already happened, software licensing, when you move to the cloud, SAM and software asset management really becomes something that you don't need to do anymore, because just by virtue of paying to access it, the licensing is included. And if everything moves to as a service, so car as a service, house as a service, We see it already with landlord insurance and building insurance. If you're a renter, you don't bother with. So I think, yes, the model will evolve. Will insurance still exist? Yes, I think it probably will, because I've never lived in a house that's burnt down, but I still take out building insurance because there is that 0.0001 chance it does. And if it does, I want somebody to write me a big check. So I think insurance isn't going away. I think there'll be a maturity, and I think there'll be the two-way reciprocity between insurance and risk, and how that's monetised will certainly evolve as we see more and more data subjects. I think that the hardest part of all of this, and a lot of the conversation has been around the technology, as opposed to rather how the normal individuals that either run a business or purchase these things can start consuming that, and it's how the technology is productized over time. And I think that's probably something that, as technologists and academics, there's an education and awareness in the marketplace. Most firms still don't even know what AI is. They think it's maybe a predictive report, or it's a control find in a Word document. And a lot of organisations don't have the data in a good enough position to be able to leverage the sort of artificial intelligence and so on and so forth downstream. So yeah, just a couple of musings and observations rather than a direct question, but happy to accept challenge or commentary back from the panel.
I think we were asked to be a bit provocative, so maybe I do believe that insurance will exist in 20 years. I just want to be radical.
Okay, any more observations? That was fascinating and provocative.
Just picking up on the theme of whether insurance will exist or not. It tends to be viewed, this idea of more and more visibility, better information, better algorithms, more data points, that it reduces the size of insurance markets. But there is also a view that as you get more data, it creates new insurance markets, and it creates new possibilities to insure entities, individuals, events that either weren't conceptualized or were considered uninsurable. So, for example, individuals with severe health problems tended to be lumped into one category. With better data, it makes it possible to insure them. So these things generally don't just work in one direction, and it's there is a view that it could actually increase the size of insurance markets.
Any observations on?
I think that's closer to what I was trying to get. I wasn't trying to say insurance won't exist. I think insurance as a professional practice that looks like it does now. And it's exactly because of what you're talking about, the idea that new products could evolve. People might choose to both take and offer insurance who otherwise wouldn't have been involved in it before.
And the things that people actually measure in terms of a risk, I mean, most of the insurers now are doing a deep dive into environment, social governance. Moving beyond just net zero, but actually into how good is that company within its community, and these sorts of things have been lip service for a while, but you're starting to find mines that can't get insurance, polluting organisations that can't get insurance. The reinsurance markets aren't touching them either because their shareholders are not allowing them to touch them, and so actually, to me, any of these microtransactions. There will always be changes in the business model. Somebody will always find a specialism, as you say, that actually helps to make sure everyone can get coverage, whereas in the past they couldn't. But I think a lot of it is down to it has been. We're talking insurance a lot. There's many professional services, but in many cases it's been a blunt instrument, which is I can divest myself of the risk by transferring it to you for a cost, and then I don't have to change. I'm passionate about making sure that where there is risk, it's mitigated. This is human lives. This is business continuity. This is employment. If a factory burns down, lots of people get injured, but lots of people lose their jobs. And so to me, it's actually the data helps us to make it easier to identify where the problem is and go and fix it. rather than just insuring?
I think we put a lot of emphasis here on the AI and AI transforming, allowing this digital transformation. But one of the core findings from our knowledge space that we were analyzing using social network analytics from our data is actually AI is true. It is in the core of the insurtech industry globally, and there are different variations, different places in the world, and even within the UK, we were able to map that. But first, it's not only AI, it's AI-related technology, some concept called the general purpose technology, GPT, if someone is familiar with that term. So there is a cluster of knowledge, of categories of knowledge and technologies that coalesce. And the second thing is that we are able to understand how insurtech works. So, for example, we found clusters that are more likely of technology that are more likely to appear in health insurance rather than other insurance. And we also find some variation between different regions in the globe. For example, if we look at the cluster that is related to health insurance, we found that the American cities that lead on insurtech solution, they have lots of offering in health insurance because of the demand, because of the private insurance there. While in London, there isn't any very, very low specializing in health insurance. So it's more about different technologies that coalesce for a specific line of insurance rather than AI or AI-related technology.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so for me, just a question. To get a sense of where the panel feels regulation will fit in with this.
Regulation, sorry, what?
Regulation fits in with this. So to take two examples we're all familiar with here, it's been mentioned today. One is you can put a box in your car and it can measure how safely you drive. And if you drive safely, your insurance premiums go down. If you drive safely, they go up. A good thing, and you probably argue it would be good for everyone to have that in their cars. Then you can flip it around and look at another example we're familiar with, say in the US, where detailed knowledge of your health would be a problem because you'd be now, for example, have a pre-existing condition and now you can't get health insurance, or it's very expensive to do so, which has a negative impact on society. It's been interesting to see, you'll get your thoughts on where regulation is going to fit into that next horizon.
Yeah, it's just a bit profound, Alex.
It's not clear to me that you can account for all the variance in the systems we're talking about emerging by being able to have a system of regulation that's thought of in terms of first principles and built to accommodate it. I've no doubt there will be efforts at regulation, there always will be, but it's probably asinine to say that we can now predict the world of 2035 and regulate to make sure that all of the bad things that happen as a result of what's going on then are thought of and protected against. I always come back to an example from some other work that we did looking at the spread of disinformation online, but I don't think anybody who was involved in the project of building YouTube thought that they were building a tool for sparking the career of right-wing bigots, but actually a lot of people make a lot of money from doing that. It exists as a way of making sure that can happen. I don't think you could have regulated to prevent that. So I think that kind of phenomena will always emerge from what we're talking about.
I would answer that, regulation has a significant role with regards to data as a whole. So it could be not related directly to insurance, but we already came across here in the UK a few years ago, a startup that worked with the API, Facebook API, tried to proxy risk through Facebook behavior of individuals that did provide their consent, feeding that into insurance. So data source, it doesn't have to be under the FCA, ICO specifically. It should be like an umbrella policy with respect to regulation about data, as I mentioned before, data ownership and data IP.
I tend to, when I'm thinking of regulation, I think of the ethics of it as well. I mean, today, actually, strangely, if you're a larger organisation, you can get away with having more risk than if you're a small SME. If you're a big property, you have to answer less questions than a house. And so actually I think the important thing, and something we followed through with the help of Digital Catapult, was actually the ethics in the AI, making sure that we didn't generate profiles based on old data, because the first problem you've got in a project is getting data, and often that can be old data, and therefore you just perpetuate discriminatory models. So the first thing was to make sure that we built the models correctly. The second thing was to make sure that the unintended consequences, you know, if a large organisation is found to have a number of risks, if it's a big enough policy, enough people will want that business. If a small organisation has an increased number of risks because you're now measuring new things, you don't want the smaller organisation to not be able to get insurance and make people, you know, unemployed. So we spent a lot of time in the No Risk project making sure that we had an ethical AI framework, just generally an ethical framework, so that we always understood we were building new models. Some of these hadn't been tested, some of them were using new data sources that hadn't been in models before, and we were always looking to make sure that people could query it. How did you come to that score for me? How can I get access to my data? How can I use my data to better, you know, buy things with and get cheaper insurance? So I think to us it was all around the ethics, not necessarily the big regulation.
Another thing that I would add to that is currently we witness situations where the regulator are more reactive than proactive. So they are asking companies that, you know, use data that they shouldn't use, etc., pay for that externality, and they put a price to it. But that's more reactive approach. I think the more accurate approach would be to be proactive, to try and co-design protocols, as we heard earlier today from Graham, about have like something similar to open banking and learn from other industries. One of the leading one is banking, to design protocols that would manage these issues of and externalities that are not taken into account when deciding about the cost.
Okay, I mean, I find the whole area of regulation fascinating, because when I started out on banking startups and chatting to one particular startup, I said, because he was doing mostly data with a little bit of banking on the side, he couldn't actually find out who his regulator was. And, you know, did he have to go to the data regulator somewhere? So I think as we get that blurring of boundaries in the industry, then I think the regulator has to react as well. So it's my way of thinking. What the regulators do in coming to terms with blurring of boundaries and the next 10 years is not just as important, is as important and will be influential in how things develop and what concretises. Any more questions from the floor or observations? No? All right. I've got a couple of quick questions, I hope they're quick, for each of you. In the work that you're doing, each of you, what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve, other than profits and being promoted and things like that? So, Alex, starting at you this time.
I'm not sure about trying to achieve, but the thing that I find most interesting is that we had to try to build an ontology of the sector that we were working in. As I've said before, there didn't really exist any massive sets of data sets that would allow us to say this is what the affordable justice sector looks like. And we ended up building a set of technologies that tried to infer rather than deduce from what was available what was going on in there. And as a phenomenology, it's been really interesting applying that to other sectors. We invented metrics that allowed us to infer the innovative capacity of organisations, whether they would be receptive to injections of capital and things like that. And it's been very rewarding seeing that they actually bear fruit and apply to things other than what we targeted at. And yeah, I'd say I found it very exciting that you could perhaps look at what is otherwise a very blurry picture and start to see phenomena emerge from that, just from our own targets.
It's a difficult one. As an academic, the outcome, you want as many papers as possible, but that's not the right answer. I would think we aim in that research to develop something that would allow policymakers see as far as possible. So you can see a lot of collaboration, as we discussed before, and the innovation, disruptive innovation, the cumulative innovation happening in the insurance industry. But in many times, it's the low-hanging fruits. So you can see different aspects to it within the industry. So in my view, the tools that we developed is something to provide leadership in incumbents, policymakers, investors, etc., that would look at the future, where are we going, to help them to see the tool that we provided and see ahead where are we going with in terms of innovation in that industry.
From my side, there's two particular drivers. One is that people aren't just underwriting risk. They're actually mitigating risk. They're actually driving down the risk. They're actually using the data to increase. After a pandemic with lots of companies closed down and closing their doors, I don't think anyone can afford business continuity issues again. People are beginning to take it seriously, and if the data highlights a risk, then that will be mitigated. The second one to me is there is not another Grenfell Tower, because since Grenfell Tower, there was a student apartment in Bradford or wherever it was. There's been a similar property in Dubai. There was one back in last year in Milan, the Sale building. All of them, these are common sorts of issues. Thankfully, in some of those latter ones, no one died, but Grenfell Tower will cost the insurance industry something in the region of 2 billion, because there's carcinogenics in the ground now and people will die of cancer. So, I want to use risk data to mitigate the risk. Actually, the insurers will become more profitable because no one will need to claim. So, that's quite good. But it's not just about the technology, it's actually about driving down risk.
Okay, and just sort of leading on from that, we've spoken a lot about NGS, we've spoken a lot about UKRI, academics, small, medium enterprises, which way the industry is going. How do you think the customer of these businesses will see their outcomes change? What will be the big difference that they will see in their relationship with professional services, do you think?
From my side, actually, I have more and more conversations with financial service organisations, insurers, etc., about sharing that data with the client. We're bringing data from many sources, we're scoring it, we're giving it a probability of accuracy, all of these sort of AI sort of ways of working, but ultimately sharing that data back with the client. Lots of large corporates do not know of the risks in their organisations. All the data that the insurers traditionally collected has been collected for a purpose, but it's not been able to be employed then back in the organisation. So actually, more of it becomes a portal that's shared both ways. The client owns their data, but they can validate it, which gives the insurer better data next time. So I think from that side, it's the sharing of data.
Yeah, to link with that is the preventative insurance. I think that's what you meant, to allow the individuals or organization to change their behavior if it's insuring against cyber security issues, if it's an organization, if it's your health, the way you behave through, vitality, for example. So individual level or organization level. But I think more fundamentally is the data ownership that I mentioned before, to flip that industry while giving the individual or the organization the ownership to decide whether they want to share the activities they engage with, the way they chat on Facebook, everything that might be useful in one stage through a third party or directly to proxy the risk, because there is a link between everything we do with the way we are being underwritten.
I genuinely don't know. I appreciate what you're saying, and I tend to agree with the vision, but it's not clear to me that individuals or organisations want that responsibility or are prepared to take it, even if they do. So it doesn't it's not clear to me that that future does actually roll out like you described, just because.
Maybe to allow this option to
Absolutely afford it, but just on a fundamental level, are you prepared to take that just because it's put in front of you?
We've seen a bit of a dynamic already where that's starting to happen, where the insurer has their risk management systems, the clients have their enterprise risk management systems. They both enter the same sort of data with human errors between the two systems, and they would rather share a single system. But then the first thing they need to do is put in place some trust. I'm managing my day-to-day risks, the ones I wouldn't normally tell you about. If all of a sudden you're seeing every single one of these risks, am I going to be penalised first of all? And then when I do better manage them, are you going to charge me less? Well, no, you're not today. Oh, okay, well then why should I do it? So there is a degree of growing up that needs to be done.
Yeah. So there's a need to take the industry with us, I say generally, and the customer as well, and the regulator. So there's a huge amount of mutual understanding, mutual trust, and mutual education still to go on. So on that point, I'm going to close, conscious of I'm standing between you and the man who's standing between you and the beer. So I'd like to thank the panel very much. I found that fascinating. I hope you did too. Thank you.
Right, so as Phil said, we're approaching the end of the day. I've got a couple of things I want to do. Firstly, I want to launch hot off the press a report, which is a follow-up from the AI for Services report of 2020. This is the 2022 report. This particular one is building on the previous one. It's identified that there is clear evidence of the opportunity for the UK and that opportunity is far-reaching in these sectors to innovate. I have to refer to my notes because it is so hot off the press that I don't actually remember everything that's in there yet. It also is comparing with other countries around the world and trying to establish where the UK is against those in terms of opportunity and taking forward the areas, particularly of insurtech, account tech, and law tech. And it's finding that the UK is really quite well placed to take advantage of our strengths in the technology sector more broadly, our strengths within the incumbent services sectors of law and insurance, and law, insurance, and what's the other one? Accountancy. Sorry. You'd think I hadn't been doing this for 5 years, but just went blank there. And it also highlights what the key drivers shaping innovation in those areas are. So some very brief findings from the report to share with you. I don't want to cover it all too much because I do want you to take away a copy, or online, the URL should be there for you. But some brief findings. So COVID-19, we all really wish it hadn't happened, but there are a couple of small things that it has helped with. So like in many sectors, there is a perception that it has driven forward uptake of various technologies. The report finds that there's actually real evidence of that take-up. It's identified, or it's, I guess, confirmed that skills and leadership in technology adoption within the sectors is still a barrier, still a challenge for the firms in the demand side, let's call it. It's also identified that there's reluctance around some of the take-up connected to the potential of cyber breaches around data, or other regulatory and compliance issues around that. And finally, it has shown that a lot of the take-up is still around trying to do what is done today more efficiently. So that touches a bit on some of the discussions in that last panel. So rather than trying to take the technology and find new ways of delivering the services that customers and clients require, it's still very much putting in place more efficient ways of doing it in today's model. A little SWOT summary from the report. So opportunities, then the UK is Europe's leading tech hub, and there is that opportunity to build on that. However, weakness-wise, that's strength, isn't it, top left? Weakness-wise, then the technical skills within the service sectors still show as a weakness. Opportunity, bottom left, is that building on the pandemic-induced tech momentum, really, we need to try and capitalize on that, right? It's started, there is a movement there, but need to drive that forward. And then the threat is, again, around data and limitations around data to do with privacy, to do with formats of data, accessibility of it, a number of areas that I'm sure you're all familiar with. So then a little bit of view of the markets in these areas. I'd say it's a mixed picture on investments across the three areas. So the first graph on the left here is funding or investment going into the insurtech area. And you can see that's quite an exponential graph. We might not like exponential graphs after the last 2 years, but it is a positive one for us. That's reached nearly £600 million worth of investment in the UK in insurtech in 2021. So it's a 170-odd% rise since the previous year. So I'd say that's a really strong picture, right? The middle picture is law tech, so a bit bumpier, but a growing area. That's the bar on the right-hand side is 20 million. And then the final one is account tech, a much bumpier picture. There is growth across the 5-6 years that this is identifying, growth of about 60%, but it's obviously very up and down. So I'd say that that's an area that could be better. In terms of active investors against other jurisdictions, then essentially this graph shows that the USA in all three sectors is by far and away the most active investment area. Again, probably not a surprise, but it puts some figures on it. But the positive thing is that the UK is second across the board, and second above Germany by a significant way, so approximately twice as much as Germany. So as I said, this is available for you now. You can pick up a copy if you're here in person outside, and if you're online still, then the URL should have been shared in the chat. It's live as well. So then I have some closing thoughts. I guess a little off-script closing thought. We've questioned the value of black boxes in cars today. I personally find it really valuable to have the black box in my car, not because of the insurance, although it is a sort of insurance thing, but because I have, on 2 occasions in the last year, been charged a fine for going through the Dartford Tunnel. I live nowhere near the Dartford Tunnel, and the black box allowed me to prove to them that it wasn't me. So that's the first thought. From the programme more generally. So I think we found that there really is a clear need and appetite to engage in innovation in these areas. You've seen from the graphs that Melanie shared earlier that we've experienced an oversubscription to all our programs, and I believe we've provided value back to participants. But there's still barriers that remain, right? There's barriers around culture in these sectors. So risk aversion, trying to persuade lawyers, for example, to take up technology or to innovate, which is inherently needing to take risks, is not always the easiest thing, as I think Tim and team can attest to. The business models also remain barriers. So the partnership model doesn't always help with innovation, with dispersing of profits at the end of a financial year, not having a continuing working capital into following years to undertake longer-term innovations, or the billable hours model, which takes fee-earning partners or fee-earning people within a firm away from, means that they are less willing to undertake innovation activities that aren't directly fee-earning, is what I'm trying to say. There's legacy systems that fit across all three sectors that in themselves cause inertia for taking up technology. And then I mentioned the skills earlier, and finally, data. Data is a big area that needs addressing, with either data silos, people holding on to their own data. We heard a solution to it in the video from Sally earlier, but trying to unlock that is really important. And then the data being in incorrect or unusable formats, that's still an issue, still something to work on. But the UK has some clear advantages, right? The regulatory regime is actually quite liberal in this country that helps for innovation. I was talking to some Canadian lawyers last week, and they were so jealous of our regulation system that we could actually drive forward some of the innovation areas that we could. That well, actually, it wasn't the lawyers, it was others that were saying the fact that not every legal service is a reserved legal service in this country means, or they believe it means, that we can innovate far faster in there. And the fact that we have the opportunity to use different alternative business structures and ownership means that we ought to be able to get the cross-disciplinary teams together that enable innovation to happen in these firms. There's clear opportunities. Up there you'll see a PwC stat of an expectation of a 10% increase in GDP across these three sectors by 2030 if we apply AI properly. And then touching on some of the things that were discussed in the last panel, I think the services that are offered today, those needs are not going to go away, right? So we talked about insurance. The need for people to be able to cope with catastrophic effects or car crashes, etc., that's never going to go away. However, the way that's delivered can, and I believe will, change over maybe the next decade or so. So that, for me, is really where the future opportunities are. So just final sort of slide around those opportunities. The sectors we're talking about are massive parts of the economy, right? And probably you all know parts of that, but if you take them in total, it's 14% of the economy with 5.5 million jobs across the country. And it is across the country because 73% of those jobs are outside of London. They take up 20% of the graduates every year into these sectors, and they are huge exporters. In total, as well as the total economic value of the sectors themselves, they underpin everything else that happens in the country, trade-wise, and for individuals, they're an important part to be able to plan for their future or deal with issues as they come up. So these are really critical sectors and sectors that I think need supporting into the future. Areas that I think could develop further. So if you look at the total need versus what's actually addressed by some of these sectors, there's a really big disparity, right? About 28% of people who have a legal issue every year actually manage to access services to help them with that issue. So that leaves 72%, had to do the quick mental math, 72% that aren't served, right? And they're not served principally because the business model today, where you have highly paid individuals serving that market, doesn't allow the margins that are necessary to serve them. So I think there is a massive opportunity there where someone can apply technology and have a broader reach, so a much bigger pie, maybe at smaller margins, to serve that area. I mentioned earlier that technology is principally looking at efficiency gains today. Well, there are opportunities there to completely rework how things are done and move things closer to the ultimate need of the end client, end user. And increasing access to data, making better use of that data will continue to be an area that people can develop into. So I think there are definitely opportunities to transform these sectors and continue where we've started. So then, another little prop. We have a brochure that's now available outside that will give you more information on all the projects we've funded within the programme. Unfortunately, we don't yet have the URL for this because it is so hot off the press to share online, but we'll get that message out. So please pick up that. And it leaves me now just to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who've come here in the room and spent your time with us today. Thank you to those people online who have managed to stick through to now. I want to thank the team at UKRI. It's been a privilege for me to work with, I have to say. The KTN for organising this. But most, I want to thank all the projects that participated, because we've shared some impact that has been achieved by the programme. But that impact ultimately is a result of their hard work, their bright ideas that they executed on. Right? We can set the playing field, set the rules of play, but they're the ones that actually play and get things done. So really, thank you very much to all of you. And I want to give a cut to that. And then, as it says, the bar is open, or the refreshments are open, right? It doesn't have to be alcoholic. So thank you all very much, and please join us for a drink if you're here.